Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you for your patience in enduring me throughout this talk. A lot of my research is entirely trying to understand inequality and poverty. This is what I try to do. Very early on in my career, when I was still a graduate student, we were trying to estimate how much of heterogeneity in earnings is due to something that agents know and act on based on information that they have, but we, when we look at the data, wouldn't actually know, versus how much of this inequality is due to some random luck that they actually had, right? And really, in many different ways that we looked at the data, we came to the conclusion that 50 to 60% of the variability in earnings, and I'm really looking at the variability in earnings after we actually take out things like observed education, potential experience, some measure of location where they were, a lot of observed characteristics of these individuals. And as you know, if you actually run a regression like this, you would be very happy if the R-square were like 20%. So understanding that 50 or 60% of the residual variance is due to things that agents know, but we don't know what these are, versus being random luck, really was something that shocked me. I just thought that this is wrong. We're going to do this again, and we're going to do this again, and we're going to do this again. And no matter how we did it, we actually came to the same, more or less the same response. So this notion that there is so much inequality out there that is determined by characteristics that the individuals know and act on, but somehow we fail to measure in the data, is really what drives a lot of my research interests to this day. So here is, let me try to, I'll go very, usually, in past versions of this, I spent a lot more time talking about the data. Today I'm not going to talk so much about the data. I want to talk a little bit more about methods, but I'll start just to tell you what's going on here. So this is Piketty's famous book, Sensation in the New York Times, right? Top 1%. Here I plot the top 10%. I always joke and I say that, the New York Times journalists didn't want to let people know that they were actually also benefiting a lot from what happened in the last few years, because this is inequality up to 1940s. Then it goes down. This is the share of the income that goes to the top decile. And then eventually it rises up again, more or less to the same level as before. And then there's this entire discussion, what's driving this? Okay, and I'm going to, first, when this became so popular in the United States, it was kind of very surprising to me, because when I decided to study labor economics, I decided to study labor economics because of this, and this was at least 10 years before Piketty actually wrote about the book. So this is a fact that has been known by the literature people working in inequality for many years. So it's not a surprise. Not only by people studying microeconomics, but also people studying macroeconomics. And the debate that there was in the literature very early on was whether this increase in inequality was caused by demand for skilled labor starting to grow at a faster rate than the supply of skilled labor. That is the skill bias technical change story, versus the opposite story, which is there's no change in skill bias. The skill bias technical change didn't actually increase the demand for the growth rate for the demand for skilled labor, but it's really the story of the supply of skilled labor is not growing as fast as before. Okay. Now, how much of this is one versus the other really depends on countries. So you have to look at specific countries to understand what's going on. In the US, it seems that the majority of the force is due to the skilled labor is not growing as fast. The supply of skilled labor is not growing as fast as before. So this is work by Katz and Golden, who went back as far back as the generation of 1870, and he started documenting what is the fraction of each cohort that graduated from college by age 35 years. And what you see here is super interesting, because someone who is going to be born in 1870 if you look at 35 years later, they're going to be in the market in 1905, right? So this generation here, there is a growth rate in the increase in the population that is going to college is growing, but relatively not so much. Then suddenly there's this major increase in the growth rate, so the curve becomes far more steep. And then for males, it has kind of fluctuated around this level. And for females, it fluctuated, but then it returned to the same level as before, right? So I always say, if you really want to understand what's going on, it's important to pay attention to why males are not going to college as much as females anymore, okay? That's an important component. And there is research I'm not going to talk to, but relates to some of the issues that we're going to talk about today, which is cognitive versus non-cognitive skills. Okay, so this is the story. Now a lot of people in the U.S. think, oh, this is not having access to college. That's actually not true. In terms of access to college, there is really a lot of gains. So for example, this is the same birth year, and this is the share enrolling in college, okay? And what's going on in here is that now close to 70% or close to 80% of women, 75% of the women are enrolling to college, and close to 60% of the men are going to college. So fractions of people going to college have never been as high now as before. The problem is not a lot of them are actually graduating. And for females, this figure was about 40%, an increase to about 45%. Again, a lot of people are going to say this is better stocks of skills, higher stocks of non-cognitive skills that females have, but that's not the only explanation out there. And then for males, it was around 55%, but now it's only about 45%. So it really has decreased, okay? Why is that? Well, this is Hawksby. You know, if you talk to a lot of college professors in the US, they're always stressed about where their child is going to go to college, okay? And then, if you talk to me, I'm always concerned about people not graduating from college. That's the concern that I have. Why? Well, there's this really strong separation in the market right now, segmentation in the market. So you have the selective institutions. Those are the institutions, basically these three top institutions here. They attract the best students in the United States. And then you have the other side of the market that has not done so well. So here's what's going on. So take the top institutions in the United States. In the 1960s, the median student here had an SAT of in the 9th percentile, right? Over time, what happened? Well, the median percentile now is 97. So the top universities are attracting really high-skilled individuals, while the institutions that are that were the least selective in the 1960s, they actually started accepting people that were between the 50th and the 65th percentile. Now most of them are really well below here. What is going on is we're getting a lot of more people to go to college, but they don't have these skills to succeed in college, and they're going to universities that actually are not prepared to offer the kind of services and support that they need for them to succeed. It's a major challenge that there is a lot of people doing research in the United States in terms of what are the services that these individuals need in order for them to graduate from college. So we're working with community colleges in Houston. Let me give you a figure. This is a high-performing community college in Houston, in the Houston area. The graduation rate is 15%. Right? So, and we had this program that increased graduation rate from 15% to 19%, and they wanted to actually go to the street and celebrate. And I was tremendously disappointed, right? But they were like, oh my God, this is so great. I mean, I said, really? This is very far from where we actually need to go. So this is the problem that we have to face. The vacancies that opened up in the United States were not vacancies at these institutions, as you can see. They became far more competitive over the last 50 years. The vacancies that opened up were in these bottom institutions here, and they were the ones that received students that actually were not doing as well, at least in terms of the SAT. Okay, so this is an old calculation that started with Murphy and Katz and Murphy, 1980s, late 1980s. At that time, they already understood that there was this increase in inequality and this increase in the college wage premium. And then they proposed this production function, they assumed, let's assume that the economy only uses labor. And you can put capital in here. If capital, if it is the kind of Cobb-Douglas situation in which this is labor and then you have a contribution coming from capital, this is not going to do much of a difference. If you now say that there is different elasticities between skilled labor and capital and unskilled labor and capital, then this calculation might be slightly different. But the qualitative figures are still going to be the same. So what they wanted to do is the following. How much of the wage premium can be traced back to differences in the stocks of skilled versus unskilled labor? Okay? And a lot of the differences in inequality that we see in more recent years is due to the increase in the college wage premium. And nowadays, it's even the post-college wage premium. Okay? And this is basically Katz and Godin again, going back to data from 1910. It's very hard to pin down what's going on here. But one is data, the other one is model. And you can see that this actually fits the data extremely well in terms of predictive values. So again, it's the story that this was growing at a very fast rate, suddenly stopped growing, or it started growing at a much slower rate, and now you have this increase in inequality. Okay? So here's the plan. Inequality, so I'm going to show you a little bit of data, not as much as I would usually. But I want to tell you the following story. Inequality in skills is really linked to inequality in adult socioeconomic outcomes. Okay? So that's going to be story number one. The inequality in skills that we're going to see in adulthood is the partial product, of inequality in investments that start really early and continue. It's not early investment. It actually starts prenatally, and then it continues all the way through adulthood. And unfortunately, what we see is increasing inequality in skills and also increasing inequality in investments. So in the last 30 years, inequality in skills have become even more important. In the last 30 years, the inequality in investments has also become even more important. And if the generation who is 15 years old now has a lot more inequality in skills than the generation who was 15 years old 30 years ago, you can imagine what's going to happen with inequality 30, 40 years from now, right? Because what we're going to have is a labor market in which the inequality in skills is going to be even more important than what it is right now. None of it, I'm not going to claim that any of it is going to be causal for now, because all of this is going to be correlation with studies. And then I'm going to come back in the end and I'm going to tell you evidence from some randomized control trials. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, please, and ask, I am especially interested in hearing people who don't agree with me, because this is when I learn the most. Yeah.
Actually, I agree with you.
No, so then stop. Then stop. Shut up. No, go ahead.
I wonder about your prediction that inequality in skills and then outcomes will further increase, especially based on correlation evidence. Is this like gut feeling or?
Oh, I don't know. No, I really don't know, but I am worried. I don't know if that's going to be true or not, because that also depends on the economic environment, and to some extent, welfare depends more on inequality in consumption than inequality in income, right? So there are many ways that we can undo inequality in outcomes by transferring. And in some countries, we have really seen some really very interesting innovative policies in terms of transfer of resources. But there is another side of the story if we're social scientists, which relates to having skills as part of the identity that you actually build, in which case just transferring income might not be the same. So there is this debate. I have no idea how this is going to play out. But I worry that inequality is not as easy to be addressed if the forces that are causing inequality are forces related to investments that take 2 decades to actually, for us to see the consequence of 2 decades of investment, right? Because kids are born and then they go to college, they graduate when they are 23, 25, then we start looking at their income and then we say, here's inequality. But that actually is a process that started well before. And if that's the case, it's going to be tricky, okay? Yeah?
Does this include for-profit colleges?
Oh yeah. I had a picture that I see, I am so sorry that I took this down. I had a picture of how much of the increase in college access is for-profit. A lot of it is for-profit. A lot of it is also community colleges that are not for-profit. But that's the majority. For-profit, which really is charging very high prices for very low quality education, which then brings the problem of student debt in the United States, which is massive. Okay. Any other questions? So here, yeah, go ahead.
So with the non-profit colleges, do they have any don't they have any national standard that they have to reach or a national quota, or can they just let everyone fail if they want?
Oh, so now it's very interesting. Now there is how do I say, initiatives trying to promote information for people when they go to college. They see this is the graduation rate of the college you want to apply, that you want to go. This is how much money that they are making 5 years after graduating, okay, and so on and so forth. Very few people actually go to the websites. Okay, so this is the story that information, the consumption of information, is something we don't understand. We don't understand as much as we need, and that shows up in a lot of other situations. Not only in terms of investments in human capital, it shows up in political economy. What are the kind of channels people turn into when for elections, so on and so forth. So I don't think we understand a lot of. We don't. This is going to be I have like a last slide that I'm going to tell you what it is right now, which is, here are all the topics we don't know. And I only thought about it for 30 seconds. So that's a topic that we don't know much about, that we need to start learning more in order for us to actually have better policy. Because it's true. I mean, the debate nowadays in some countries is to tie repayment to colleges based on how much money that the students are making, which is a problem because we don't even understand many times what is the causal impact of college on earnings, right? So if we could actually do this well, then I see an easy solution. But we don't know how to do that very well. There are ways that we do, but if you really look at the statistics, the bands of uncertainty around any number are really very large, because this is not randomly assigned. We don't randomly assign students to colleges, right? So it's really hard to actually answer that question. It's a fascinating question. I mean, this is what, I mean, isn't it? I mean, think about this. If you could figure out a system that would align the incentives of students in college, that would be, man, that would be like fantastic, right? So you should get a Nobel Prize in economics, in biology, and in physics, in every science, because that would be a tremendous contribution. And I think that it's a really worthwhile contribution to do. Okay, so here's what's going on. So now I want to tell you that the outcomes are partly produced by cognitive and non-cognitive skills. Okay, that's the game now. So I'm going to show you 5 slides about this. Outcome number 1. Dropping from high school to graduating from high school. Cognitive skills higher in this direction, left to right. Socio-emotional skills higher in the direction from bottom up. Okay, and here's the probability from 0 to 1, very well defined. And what happens here is, yes, the higher the stocks of cognitive skills. So let's fix here one of these curves, boom, the higher the probability of graduating from high school, the higher the stocks of socio-emotional skills, fixing cognitive skills, boom, the higher, and obviously it's in a way that the higher the stocks of both skills, the higher the probability of graduating. This is true for high school, This is true from graduating from high school and enrolling into college. It's true from enrolling to college to actually completing college, okay? And then it's also true, not so much, but it's also true for wages, which is a problem because if you remember, one of the reasons why I wanted to study this is what are the kinds of skills that we don't observe that people actually have, and cognitive skills and socio-emotional skills as we measure them don't actually explain a lot of the variability in wages, okay? But I think that there are things that we're not measuring well. So that's another area that I think people can do a lot of work. So, okay, so these are skills that are measured at age 15. Earnings is measured when individuals are at age 30. Okay, so it's possible that future earnings there's a correlation here, but it's not immediate. It's not that they are being measured exactly at the same point in time. Okay, so here, yeah, go ahead.
You were saying so the socioeconomic,
Emotional.
and the cognitive skills are measured at 15.
Yeah, and the earnings at age 30, right? Okay, so now let's look at the children from these guys here. Okay, so the children were born were followed basically from the point that they were born, and they continue to be followed now. So some of them are now close to 30 years old, 40 years old. Okay, so we know a lot about these children as well. Okay, so this is a test score in math that they started collecting when the children were 3, and then they continued to collect until children were 14. It's hard to comply with, skills in math skills when children are younger than 3, although one could do it. And then after age 14, it's less important because basically the differences are more or less stable. Okay, so here's the name of the game. Here are the parents that were. So these are the kids whose parents had the highest income between the time that the children were born all the way to age 15 of that child. So I'm looking at long-term average here. I'm going to call this permanent income. It's not exactly permanent income, but it's a good proxy for permanent income. So I now divided the sample of kids into families that have different levels of permanent income. Okay, so this is age 14. The difference between these guys, come about this in a second, is about 1 standard deviation at the time that they are 14. You go back, it's pretty much stable. They start school at age 6. At age 5, the difference is already 80% of a standard deviation. Okay, and then here it's a little bit less, 40% of a standard deviation. You have to be really. I'm gonna be really careful about this transition from 3 to 5 in a second. But what I want you to see is a lot of the differences that we actually see are going to be we are going to start to observe them early on, even before they are in school. And it's not that so this is partly reflects differences in investments, but it's not that after they actually go to school, they all go to the same quality school. They go to very different quality school, and the differences that they have at the time that they start school, they are perpetuated by differences in quality of school many years later. Okay. So this is cognitive skills. It's a math test. This is socio-emotional. It's particularly interesting because it's antisocial behavior. So you don't actually want to have a high score in antisocial test. You want to have a low score. But what you see here again is this parallel trend that starts really early on and continues until later ages. Okay. Here's health. It's a little bit different. Now income is plotted in this way. And then here, instead of income groups, this is ages. Right? So if you look at the gap between rich and poor families, rich and poor kids in health at age 0 to 3 is basically, this is for the rich kids. The closer to 1 you are, the better the health. And then it's between 1.5 and 2, okay? In whatever scale this is. So it's 0.5 in this index, this difference. And then it goes to 0.5 to 0.75 when the kids are 13 to 17. So there's this increase in health inequality, but a lot of the health inequality is even present around the time that the kids are 0 to 3, okay? So cognitive skills, socio-emotional skills, health, all unequal from a very early age and continue to become, either it becomes parallel after some time, or continue to increase after some time. What is producing this? Inequality in investments. This is not a good way to do this, but this is the way psychologists have actually measured investments in children, just because it's a scalar index that captures a lot of different things. Material goods, time spent between children and their parents, and then the quality of the interaction as well. And what you see, parallel trends. Here's something else. This is time, investment in time, minutes in play. As I say, when kids are really young, 0 to 2, bad idea to teach them Bellman equations. Horrible idea. Do not try this. This is about attachment, building attachment. Children are not ready to learn, 4 different languages at this point in time, or complex math. It's really about forming attachment. There is a part of development that is starting at this point as well, which is language development. I'll talk a little bit more about this, that you can actually promote by back and forth interaction with the child. But a lot of it is building an attachment to the child, so that the child has some sense of constancy and someone to relate to, trust, okay, if you will. Children need to do that, need to have that in order for them to be able to learn. They need to see that you love them for them to actually accept what you're telling them to do, okay? Now instead of, this is by Ariel Khalil and her and colleagues. Now the figures here show maternal education. So these are moms that are college or beyond. These are moms that have less than a high school degree. And playing is really like peekaboo and ticklishing the child and, all the strange language that we use, right? To address children when they're really young. And when is the gap between socioeconomic groups the largest in minutes in play? Exactly at a time in the lives of the children that they need this type of interaction. Then you go at age 3 to 5, then it's about teaching and learning, okay? Some of it is teaching colors, numbers, letters, but also it's teaching something else, learning how to learn. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a second. When is the gap, socioeconomic gap in investments the largest? Exactly around the time in which the child could benefit the most from minutes in teaching, okay? And when kids are 6 to 13, it's not about teaching them colors, numbers, or playing peekaboo with them anymore. It's actually teaching them how to regulate emotions, how to understand the consequences of the actions, how to actually observe and understand that the actions that they have consequences in the world, right? So it's about regulation control, it's about perspective taking, it's about empathy as well, things like that. It's also a lot of management, getting the children to understand that they actually need to follow certain things. You need to study, you need to do the homework. If you don't do the homework, what will your teacher do? So here you're not only creating focus, the ability to focus on tasks, the ability to follow plans, but also the ability to understand what are the consequences of not following plans, okay? At what age is the gap across socioeconomic groups the largest? Exactly at 6 to 13, when the kids are more prepared to actually learn those kinds of things, okay? So, and then they go to school. I'm not going to talk much about school today. I'm just going to show this one picture that has been replicated in other states. Because this is, what I have here is, in this axis, is the percentage of students that are eligible for free or reduced price lunch. So if 0% of the school is eligible for free or reduced price lunch, these are rich kids. And then if 100% of the school is eligible for free or reduced price lunch, these are poor kids, okay? And what the bars show is teachers that are rated most effective in the state of Ohio, meaning that they do a value-added analysis. If the teacher value-added is above the median, they go to this group. If it is below the median, they go to this group. And what's going on? Well, high value-added teachers are assigned to high-income students. Low-quality teachers are assigned to poorer students. So inequality in skills is a product, it starts with inequality in investments that happen in the home. It continues in the school when they go to school and they get exposed to not only worse quality teachers, but also they don't get exposed to advanced placement courses, which help them get better CV in order for them to go to apply to a high quality college. It also, very interesting, almost every other aspect of socio-emotional development, and I'm going to say that team sports is a major way to develop socio-emotional development, to promote socio-emotional development. Also, they don't get as much. Okay, so inequality in skills is correlated with inequality in socioeconomic outcomes. Inequality in investments so far is correlated with inequality in skills. Now I'm going to show to you that over time, inequality in skills has increased. And then after I show that, I'm going to tell you that over time, inequality in investments has also increased over time. Okay? So that's the rest of this first part of data. So here is Sean Reardon. What he did was to compile different tests and then put these tests in a common scale, meaning he adjusted tests so that all of the tests had at least one question that was consistent across all the years. Okay, and then he normalized in every year. He produced a factor model in which every year the normalization happened exactly the same item. So this is a way to try to enforce tests to be as difficult across years. A lot of people that criticize this approach, happy to talk more. I'll touch about this when I talk about cardinality of test scores, but I'll not talk extensively about it today. So here's what's going on. So a lot of people wrote about this curve here. This is black and white gap in the United States in terms of schooling achievement, school achievement. Okay? So from the 1960s to the 1990s, there was this decrease in black-white differences in how well they score in tests. But then since the 1990s, it has not changed. Okay? What a lot of people had not looked at, and Sean was one of the first to actually do this, is to look at the income gap between poor and rich holding race constant. And unlike this gap here, it actually has increased, okay, over time. So this is statement number one. We don't have a lot of measures of socio-emotional skills that have been collected for very long periods of time. One of the few is this measure of social trust. And what we see is downward trend in social trust all over. But the gap between the high and low income families, the high and low income individuals actually has increased over time. Okay? Health, this is a measure of obesity up to age 5. Okay, so not counting individuals older than 5 years old. This is the curve of obesity for low-income families or families whose parents have high school degree or less. It started around 5% in 1975, goes to over 20% in 2010, and this here increased from 1990 to 2005, but then it has returned again. So increase in skills, inequality in skills, inequality in investments, inequality in skills is increasing over time, and I'm going to tell you that inequality in investments in skills is also increasing over time. Okay, so this is this is total time devoted to child care. This does include some routine child care, like for example, if the child needs to be bathed, that's included here. If the child needs to be fed, it's included here. When we study skill formation, we don't usually include routine care because everyone does routine care, although one has to wonder about the quality of the routine care that one type of kid gets versus the other. Almost no difference between 1965 and 66 to 1985, and then suddenly this gap started to increase. Okay, so this is everyone between 0 to 15. If I only were to focus on 0 to 5, this gap would have increased even more. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you have this somehow split up by the working status of the mother?
Yes, so even if you condition the work status of the mother, this doesn't go away. The gap is actually larger for when women are Okay, so let's take out, this is where it's important to take out routine care. Because a lot of the routine care, the highly skilled mom is not going to do. It's going to be someone else. Might be the grandmother, it might be a nanny, it might be someone in a child care. But if you really look at interaction, it's really large, very large. And I'm not going to show to you something, I'm only going to hint to you about language, but if you look at language, which is a measure of interaction, really is much bigger, yeah.
And so one thing I was wondering, like, do you know what like associative mating, so people pairing up with people?
Oh yeah, that's a line of research that a lot. Okay, so I think that what you're going to start seeing are a lot of people linking family economics to child development. So I don't know if you know family economics, the cooperative models are like Capori. I don't know if you've studied this, but you're going to start seeing a lot of people collecting data so that they can actually study these types of models, because it's yes, right?
It's a plausible like
It's a
explanation for the trends, even like in like things like intelligence, you would observe that as people.
Yes. Oh yes, but I'll tell you though, you're thinking of genetics?
It's like it's both genetics, but also like child investment and things like that.
Oh
that
yeah.
all accumulate.
So I'll tell you that genes may play a role, but I don't think that it's the only story. And far from being the only story. But what really worries me is not so much the story of assortative mating per se, but the fact that a lot of the low-income families actually are single moms. Okay? So it's no mating whatsoever, right? And a lot of the kids that are born in those situations, they have siblings from different fathers, which creates a different kind of problem, which is you cannot, unless you can coordinate across different fathers to each one of them to do this work, then I don't see that as an easier problem to be addressed. So a lot of people are going to start looking at family economics and child development economics. I've seen papers coming around. I think that this is a fantastic area to study. But I think that there is something else, which is what, the assumption of Pareto optimality here might not be an optimal one might not be a realistic one when you have 2, 3 children that come from different parents. Okay, so then I think is when, I don't know if those models actually have a good infrastructure to actually deal with the problem. But I think that thinking about that problem and how to formulate policy, look, here's what happens. The truth is, in the United States, this issue has become serious not only for children, but also for the judicial system, because people are driving, they're stopped by the police, they run away. Why? Because they haven't actually paid child alimony. They're afraid of going to jail because of that. So we have lots of people who are in jail because the system is not working, precisely because we don't have good policies to address this problem, okay? But, and this is, again, so we're just collecting topics that you need to study, right? So your generation is going to change the world. I'm so happy. I failed. You don't need to fail, okay? So here's what happens. So this is time, and this is money, okay? And this is money this is not purchasing, how is it, what is it? Gabbana? No, Gabbana. What is it? Dolce Gabbana? No, how is it? I forgot the name. It's a famous, some people know this better than I do. It's not buying Ferraris for the child, okay? This is literally purchasing either high quality child care places or purchasing goods that are, it's not purchasing goods that are going to be Mozart kind of DVDs, like a baby Mozart. It's not this, but it's goods that facilitate interaction between parent and children, or that help children learn new skills once they become 6 to 10 years old and 15 years old. Okay, this is where the difference is. This is not including, fancy vacations. That's not what it is. Okay, but what you see is this tremendous increase in inequality in terms of investments. And then another way to capture this is family dinners. This is a situation in which there is a famous study done by Hart and Risley 30 years ago that documented the differences in language interaction between children and adults in the home. And they selected the times in the home that people said, this is the time that we talk a lot to the child. So they selected on purpose high talking times. High talking times were 90% of the cases, dinner. And look at what's going on with trending dinner time between adults and children. Downward trend for sure, but inequality, which tended to be small, is actually increasing. Okay, so in any way that we can track down inequality in investments over time, and there are not many ways that we can do this, we see this inequality the increase in inequality in investments going up. Okay, and also in schools, unfortunately, and not very surprising. Inequality in college going, which is a product of the skills that you have accumulated by the time you go to college, is also increasing over time. Okay, which then goes back to the concern that I have, that what's going to happen with these guys here. Okay, okay. So all of this is correlational. I do want to tell you not so much about early interventions and adolescent interventions. Okay, and here's how I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you that early interventions and adolescent interventions shift these stocks of skills. Unfortunately, these early studies didn't document exactly what were the kinds of changes to the environment that children experience. We know what the curriculum was, but we don't know what the control group was doing. We don't have good stories of mechanisms for those kids, okay? So I can't tell you what it is that was so important for the production of those skills, but we can replicate this, and people are actually replicating this. Perry, abecedarian, IHDP. Heckman talks a lot about the two, and also not so much about the third. The third is abecedarian again, but for very low birth weight kids. Okay? It's exactly the same curriculum, but you had to be low birth weight to be part of this program. And it was a randomized controlled trial as well. Okay? And unlike the abecedarian, which really looked at only low-income families, this was low and high-income families, as long as the baby was low birth weight. Okay? And look at what happened. And by the way, I'm not going to show this, but the infant health and development is about 1,000 babies, okay, that were part of it. These years were 150. Okay? The IHDP pretty much reproduces the effects of abecedarian for the low-income group, but not for the high-income group. No impact on the high-income group a few years later. Tremendous impact for the low-income group a few years later. Okay, but what is it that the Perry preschool actually changed? Okay, so this is, and it's a fantastic program. I mean, it's 1.5 hours per day, at most 2. Kids, you know, they can't take more than 2 hours of this program because it's super intense. And you know what they're doing? So they enter when they're 3 years old. Okay. And they finish by the time that they are 5 years old. So you go to a Perry preschool program, it's completely different from what you would expect it to be. Because you would think that, what do you think that they would be doing in the Perry program? You send a 3-year-old, what do you think they're going to be doing?
Playing like blocks and that stuff.
Yeah. Exactly. Play with blocks and that stuff. No MATLAB.
Yeah, no MATLAB.
No MATLAB, right? Okay, so it's fantastic because you know what it is? It's 3 simple words. Plan, do, review. Okay, so they arrive in school, they go talk to the teacher, and then there is a menu of the activities that they can do, and then there is the name and the picture of each one of the kids in that room. Okay. And they go there and they have to plan the activity they're going to do. Now there are a limited number of activities and not all of them can play with the puzzle at the same time, which already is teaching them one thing. One thing. What is it teaching them when they can't all do puzzles at the same time?
Scarce resources.
It's a horrible way to put it like this, but I think it's telling them some form of control, right? That they have to control patience, right? You have to, you know, I understand you want to play with the puzzles, but it's not your time to play with the puzzle because let's go to the menu yesterday and you played with the menu, with the puzzle yesterday. So now it's time for someone else to play with the puzzle, okay? They then have to explain to the teacher why they want to do that task. When they're explaining to the teacher why they want to do that task, there are 2 things that they are forming. The ability to make plans and they're thinking of the thing that the steps that they have to do in order for them to execute the plan that they want to do. So this is building working memory for them. Then they go and do it. And then sometimes when they take a task that is too easy for them, the teacher is going to come and change the rules of the game on them. Slightly. But, and you're looking, oh, they're cruel, right? No, no, no. It's super important that they do this. You know why? Because it builds cognitive flexibility. Okay? So cognitive flexibility is a super important task that we use day to day in our lives, which is we encounter a new problem, we then have to think about how to solve that problem, and sometimes the solution we actually are more used to will not work. This is why I think that the word research is so great in English, because I search, it doesn't work, then I research, right? So this is about cognitive flexibility. Kids that have cognitive flexibility, they have something that is really important, flexible thinking, which is they encounter a problem and then they find new ways to solve the problem. And more importantly, they have what people call set shifting, which is they look at a problem, someone comes, here's a better way to solve this problem. They actually don't get stuck in the old way of doing this. They adapt to the new way. Set shifting is super important for you to acquire productivity in the labor market many years later, because new technology is going to come and you need to learn how to use new technology all the time, right? So this program, by doing plan, do, and review. Review is when they come and then they have to explain to the classmates what was the plan that they had, what happened when the teacher made the change in the rules of the game, and how they actually solved the problem. So this is teaching them how to communicate to people, which is another skill that we learn at early stages, which is language development. Okay, so Abecedarian and IHDP actually have similar types of curriculum that are organized around the same ideas, but what is really important here is that this is not rote learning. It's not like this is a blue block, this is a blue block, this is a blue block. Put the blue block on top of the red block. And now the two of them on top of the yellow block. No, it's not about rote learning. It's not about learning ladders. Nothing about like this. It's really about building what we call the executive functions. Okay? Really what was super interesting about this is that there's this big problem in the literature on early childhood development, which was they measured IQ when the kids entered a randomized control trial. Control and treatment they were about the same. At age 4 and age 5, there's this huge impact of the program on IQ, but by age 10, the gains in IQ had actually completely evaporated. And when they looked at age 20, 30, 40, 50, they were thinking we're not going to find any impact on outcomes because there is no gain in IQ. And then guess what? They found differences in certain outcomes, especially for females, higher education attainment, better labor market prospects. For males, particularly impacts on crime. Okay? And they couldn't understand why is it that we actually have this, until they actually looked at what had happened with the stocks of socio-emotional skills when the kids were 15, 20 years old. And there's no impact on cognition, as you can see here. For females, maybe a little bit. This is telling you the p-value is 0.95, so it's really borderline, but not for males. Now, executive function, one of the components of executive function is an inhibitory control. Inhibitory control is the opposite of externalizing behavior. You say something to me, I start yelling at you, right? I would never do this, please. Say whatever you want. But so kids that score high externalizing behavior tend to score very low in inhibitory control, because one is the opposite of the other. And what you see here is, what they did is to instead of externalizing behavior, you should see this as inhibitory control, because they rescaled everything so that higher levels means something positive, which is the opposite. So you don't actually want to have a lot of externalizing behavior. So not externalizing inhibitory control behavior for here and here, and this is at age 15. no convergence in inhibitory control. And for males, no change in academic motivation. For females, some change in academic motivation. This is, again, seems to be pointing to some other form of executive control, executive function impact for females, not for males. Yeah?
How did they assess externalizing behavior? Because that is measured quite differently than inhibitory control, as we psychologists.
Oh, yes, completely different. But there are studies that show that kids that do well in inhibitory control tend to do score low in externalizing behavior. So I have the exact instrument here. It's the same one that they used in the CNLSY, but I don't remember the name right now.
A test or like?
It's a test. It's a test. It's a standardized test. Yeah. Okay. So here is, and this is the life outcomes. I'm not going to go through it, but basically, as I told you, impact in education and earnings for women, impact on crime for men, and so on and so forth. Adolescence. See, adolescence is a different stage of the life cycle of individuals. If you are about 24, 25, you're probably still an adolescent, even though technically people don't call you an adolescent anymore. But it really is about forming different types of skills. It is at that, but when kids are in their teens, two major changes are going on. One is puberty, which is accelerating, reward, sensitivity to reward, and that's going very fast as puberty goes, because it seems to be totally determined by hormonal changes in the body. And then we have this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is telling us to act rationally. Okay, so one is telling, the good analogy is, one is the gas pedal, go do stupid things. The other is the brake, don't do stupid things, has bad consequences. So when you are an adolescent, basically you are a car that has a gas pedal but doesn't have a brake. That's what's going on. Okay, so a lot of the programs that seem to be impactful are programs that are trying to accelerate this part, how this part of the brain actually develops, rational behavior. Okay, so it's not about how we measure, for example, persistence and grit. It's something else. If one of you come here, and I'm looking at you because you seem to be more likely to do it, and wants to punch me in the face, and he punches me in the face, it would be stupid for me to say, please do it again. Please do it again. I don't want to have an agreeable personality when the agreeableness is causing me to have real pain in the face, right? And I don't want to be gritty when grittiness is continue to do something that it doesn't seem to have any benefit for the future. Okay? Yes?
But agreeableness would not mean to say punch again. Agreeableness would say I can deal with what's happening, and I'm not.
Sure. but I know.
Good thing in this situation, right?
I don't know. Because if you're a poor kid living in a violent neighborhood in Chicago, if people say, let's just,
Okay,
yeah.
Interact with the environment you're living in.
Yeah, it depends on the environment. So this is about okay, so here's how we are. We're lazy, right? So if we grow in one specific type of environment, we develop responses that are optimal for that environment, right? So if I live in an environment that is very safe and everyone is very agreeable, right? Everyone is very trustworthy, right? I'm thinking Bonn, okay? So then it's a good thing for you to follow the rules and play along. But if you're living in an environment that is extremely dangerous, very violent world, you may actually not want to follow the rules. You may want to deviate from the rules, because if you don't, you may actually die early, right? So if we live in one kind of environment and we are always in that environment, we can have this automatic behavior. I'm always going to comply if I live in a good world. If I live in a bad world, I am never going to comply, and I'll always do this, and it's okay for me never to do this. A lot of the low-income kids, they live in different environments. So they live in the very dangerous neighborhood, and they have to go to school, which may not be a dangerous school. So for them, this automatic reaction may actually never be optimal, because if they are very nice when they are in the neighborhood that is violent, people are going to take advantage of them. And when they are very violent in the school, when the school is actually not necessarily a violent environment, then they're going to be expelled, and they are not going to succeed in school. So understanding how to recognize the environment where you are is about using your prefrontal cortex to make the appropriate decisions given the environment where you are. The interventions at adolescence that seem to be working are interventions that are telling adolescents, stop and think before you act when you are in an environment that is different from the type of environment you're used to. Okay? That seems to be what's impactful. Okay? And there are two of such studies. The Becoming a Man study, it's basically telling them you have to read the context, and then you choose the appropriate reaction. Okay? So this is basically telling them, look at the Nash equilibrium of the game before you actually play the game. Right? So who is the player you're playing against? Would seem crazy, but actually it seems to be the kind of intervention that it's working. And the other one is the Montreal longitudinal study that has something like that, but on top of it has parent training telling them, look, you have to help your child navigate this world because it's a complicated world. Okay, so it's not an automatic world. Okay, so, and what is it that these guys actually find? I'm going to show the Montreal, just because the Montreal measures skills. The Becoming a Man study measures primarily the outcomes, and it reduces a number of outcomes, particularly related to crime, because it's a program designed to kids who are at risk of being expelled from school, or juveniles who are in detention already. Okay, so here's what's going on. Green is no, don't worry, I will not hit you again. So the green is a group that actually is a high-income group, a comparison group that doesn't have the kind of problems that these guys actually have. Blue is control, red is treatment, and you see impact on trust, on aggression control, and this is being held back. For many years, the program had no impact, being held back just because very few students were being held back in control of treatment to begin with. And then suddenly over time it reduced the propensity of being held back. And I think that this is GPA, if I remember well. Okay, so it's impacting school outcomes even though it was not a program designed to improve school outcomes, which tells us a lot about schools and the kind of skills we should help students acquire when they are in schools. It's not necessarily how to do well in a test, but how to actually acquire skills that might be valuable for a lot of socioeconomic outcomes. Go ahead.
Did they find that this was mainly coming from the child training? Because at least many programs found that parent training doesn't work.
So the BAM would suggest so, because the BAM didn't have any, the Becoming a Man program didn't have any parent training program, but it had the child training program. So it would suggest that this is the child training program directly. Okay?
So they didn't actually have like separate treatments?
No, unfortunately no. To the best of my knowledge, no. And then they looked at outcomes later on. The green are the non-disruptive children. This is, let's say, what you could aim to. Yeah, go ahead. I don't think so. But the way they were selected disproportionately, I think disproportionately got boys, because they had to be rated as aggressive by teachers.
Yeah, maybe I want to get that.
Yeah, the majority of them, yeah. Yes, there is, maybe Brent is going to talk about, the way we raise children and the kinds of social-emotional skills that, there is this large literature that says that girls are raised to be, the ways we raise girls they get a lot of these non-cognitive skills. You're going to see that tomorrow. So, yeah.
Or even, just to like clarify, it's just like in the US, like
Yes.
they like it held back maybe because
Yeah.
they're just like.
Yeah, this is Montreal. Yeah.
You made us
Yeah.
like 5. They're like.
Yeah. This is Montreal though, so, but yes, very similar. But here's the thing. Crimes, lower. Diploma, secondary school diploma, even though there was no training in English or French and math, higher. This is presented active in the labor market a few years later, no difference. And then participate in a social group, no difference. But I was surprised that they even found this because it was not a program designed to improve any skills that would improve test scores directly. But it's again, looking at that, building that type of skill, that form, you should be aware of the environment in which you are. Okay, so now here's what I'm going to do. You have all of this data. Let's now develop a model that describes human capital formation. And then this model is going to have a few parameters, and then we're going to have to estimate these parameters. And it's going to be super difficult to estimate these parameters. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to have closed form solutions for everything that I'm going to do, because I'm going to have almost a linear model. Almost everything is going to be normal and linear. And then I'm going to describe the steps one by one so you can see why these steps are necessary. And there is something that I want to, okay, so let's go right now. Okay, so here we go. This is what we talked about, early development. It's language and cognitive skills, and especially executive functions. Adolescent development. This is a great quote, which says, when I am in a car and I have my friends in a car, I do stupid things, and when my friends are not in the car with me, I don't do stupid things. Which tells you something else. It's not only about sensation seeking for adolescents, it's sensation seeking, it's engaging risk-take behavior when they're being, primarily when they're being observed by their friends. Okay, there is a great study that was done and replicated in many different ways. This is a stop and go kind of video game. So here's the game. You go from A to B, and you win a prize if you can go from A to B under a certain amount of time. Okay? Except that there is a red light at some point between A and B. And if there is a red light, you lose 3 seconds. You can choose not to obey the red light, meaning drive like a Brazilian. But then if you do that, you may cause an accident. And if there is an accident, you're going to lose 6 seconds instead of 3 seconds. And there's a 50% chance of actually having an accident because we want to be actuarially fair, right? So here's what happens. So they play these games with kids that are as old as 6, as young as 6, as old, and people as old as 60. Okay? Who are the people more likely to do stupid things when they're playing alone? Actually, no difference in adolescents, young adults, or adults. Okay? Now you change the game, and now you bring the best friend to watch you play the game. Okay, so now if it's the adolescent, it's the adolescent's best friend. If it's me, it's Armin, and then if it's Heckman, is not me. Okay, so here's what's going to happen. Armin and I are not going to play any different from the way we play because we're adults. But the adolescents are going to do something really stupid. They actually are going to start crossing the red line without waiting because they want to impress other people, right? So this is fantastic. This study has been replicated in many locations in the world. This is not US phenomenon. Also, it's not a human phenomenon because similar games have been simulated for rats, and rats did exactly the same thing. They did stupid things when they actually were with adolescent peers. Yeah?
Is it worse in men?
No.
It's the same?
No difference across genders. And it depends on the game, though, right? Because girls may not incurring as much risk-taking when it comes to driving from A to B, but in other settings they do. Okay, so it varies in the context. But this is not. It doesn't seem to be gender-specific. Okay, maybe the impact is different, but not the qualitative finding. Okay.
Would it depend on the gender of the peer?
Oh no! Okay. So they then did the following. Oh, maybe this is. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna put your peer, but not next to you, in the next room, looking at the video of you playing. Made no difference. And then they said, there is a 50% chance that your best friend is watching you play. And the same thing happened. Okay, so I don't know if know if they actually had. I don't remember describing whether boy, girl, boy, and girl made difference. But I don't know if they had a lot of because you had to select your best friend. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it's possible, but
you'd expect those kind of differences when you're like 15. You know.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect it for like adults. I would expect it for
for adults. No, for adults the differences are not statistically significant. Yeah, right. But I don't know. I mean, I would. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question though. But here's really the only thing that made a difference is the following. The only thing that made a difference is I'm now going to put an adult person in a room. Okay. And then the peer being there or not being there made no difference. They didn't behave in as much risk-taking behavior, which would tell you something about team sports. And this is why I wanted to talk about team sports. Here's a great intervention for us to get students not to commit stupid things. Just put them in team sports with adult supervision and wait until they become 25 years old. Because then they're going to behave like adults. No, you're laughing, but actually this is this is serious. And the reason why this is serious is a lot of the low-income kids, remember when I showed to you that they actually don't have as much extracurricular activities, but their moms are actually working. So who are they with? They are alone with peers in the same age, which actually, if anything, potentializes the danger that they're actually going to engage in risky behavior, right? So what is really interesting is we are so much inclined to study cognitive development that when we evaluate the impact of team sports on school outcomes, we only look at test scores. We don't look at anything else. But this theory, this neuroscientific theory, would tell you that we shouldn't be looking at test scores at the same point in time. We should be looking at outcomes related to crime 5-10 years later. Okay? Yes, someone here has a question.
So, have you said, like Jonathan just said about, if the moms are home, they're gonna hang out with the peers and engage in risk behavior. Yeah. I wonder if that's really the time use, because I don't know the data. I could imagine that they would also spend a lot of time just alone with the computer.
Yes, no. So there we know from time use that they don't. That they spend a lot of time with other peers. High income kids, if they usually have extracurricular activities in adult supervision. Even if they don't, they tend to have a nanny who is with them, right? So even if they have another peer with them, they're not always alone with the peer without adult supervision, and that's the big difference. There is some work, qualitative work that was done by a sociologist at Penn. I'll remember the name. That was later backed up by people looking at the PSID. She documented from following 20 kids that the low-income kids spent a lot of the time with peers of the same age, which doesn't necessarily only mean bad things, by the way, because she followed them when they were 30, and they were much more likely to be engaging with each other and helping each other than the ones that actually had no peers and were spending the time. But it also increased the risk that they were going to engage in risky behavior. Okay? And when people looked at the PSID to look at the time use data of adolescents, they found more or less the same pattern that she actually found. Okay? So it's not that they are spending time with other peers. It's whether they are doing so with the presence of an adult person or the absence of an adult person. Okay. Okay. So this is adolescent development. So let's do this. We're going to have a simple equation that's going to have two parameters. Parameter number one is the self-productivity of skills, and here's what I mean by this. So I learned how to inhibit control early on. And because I have that, before I actually, when I become an adolescent, because when I look at the context, I read the context, because I have inhibitory control. It's something new I haven't seen before. Instead of just acting automatically, I say, let me read this context, and then I'm going to choose an action. Okay, so this is inhibitory control, helps me understand the situation, and then helps me figure out what is the appropriate reaction to that situation I have never seen before. And then there is dynamic complementarity, right? The returns to the development of the reading context are higher for children that have learned how to inhibit control early on, but also not only inhibit control, but acquired any other type of skill that is produced at early stages of the life cycle. Okay, so those two concepts is how we're going to get the theory. This is going to be enough for us to explain many different patterns that we see in the data. Okay, so here's production functions now. It doesn't have to be a CS. But it helps to be a CES just because we're going to start getting a lot of closed form solutions in a second. Okay, so this is investment in early childhood, helping the production of executive functions. This is how much human capital I am born with, my innate stock of executive functioning, if you will. And then this is going to be my adolescent human capital, the human capital that I'm going to have when I actually start adolescence. Okay. And then once I become adolescent, I'm going to get some investment from schools and from families. And we're going to combine these two things, and we're going to produce adult human capital, H bar I. Okay? Now, obviously, this is the one that I'm going to take to college, build on, acquire skills, and then go to the labor market. Okay? Now, let me assume for a second that this parameter phi is constant across time, which is not. But let me just assume for now that it is. And then what we get is a simple representation of self-productivity and dynamic complementarity, or dynamic substitutability. This 1 minus gamma I is self-productivity. Why? This is early investment in human capital is going to produce adolescent human capital, which is then going to be combined with adolescent human capital and then produce adult human capital. Okay? So if this guy is equal to 1, nothing of my early investment matters. Okay? If this guy is equal to 0, then I carry everything from my early investment is brought to my adulthood, my adult human capital. And then the parameter phi is dynamic complementarity. And what it's saying is adult human capital is a combination of early investment, late investments, and the initial stocks of human capital. Okay, so now let's see what this actually means. Okay, so let's assume that we are one of the parents, and what we want to do, the only thing that we want to do is to maximize the human capital of our children at the lowest possible, we want to minimize the amount of investment that we're going to have so that we can attain a certain level of human capital. Okay, it's the dual problem. What is going to happen? So let's start with two extreme cases. Extreme case number 1 is there is no optimal combination. You leave the child in a cave for 10 years. You take the child away from that cave. You dump a lot of investments in that child. It's fine. We can do it. Okay. This is extreme scenario number 1. This arises when the parameter phi is equal to 1. Well, so here's how you actually solve this problem. So here's the thing. If you have two options. One is, in this case, you're either going to put all of the money early, or you're going to put all of the money late. Okay? When are you going to put all of the money early? Well, if you invest early, what you're going to get is this amount of human capital times the amount of investment that you can actually do. Okay? If you invest late, then for every dollar that you put in the bank early, you get this return here, and then the child approaches adolescence. Now what you do is you can invest 1 plus R times the amount that you actually saved in the bank, and then you get this unit of human capital. So you're going to invest early if and only if the interest rate is not too high. If the interest rate is very high, it's better for you to just put the money in the bank and then just wait for the returns to come leave the child in a cave, and then just do it, okay? Here's another extreme situation. Extreme situation is you are just the product of what you were born with, okay? So the amount of human capital that you're going to have is going to be totally dependent on the amount of early skills, the initial skills that you have. Why? Because if this is the production function that describes how human capital is produced, is the minimum of these three arguments, you don't want to invest above age 0. And you're actually going to invest early and late exactly the same amount, which is exactly equal to this guy, because any other amount that you invest is just going to be wasted anyways. So in which case, early and late investment is exactly equal to each other. And then you have every other case is going to fall under a interior solution in which how much you're going to invest depends on the interest rate and how much complementarity there is between these two things. If there is a lot of complementarity, you want to have early and late investments in human capital more or less the same, regardless of the interest rate. And if there is not a lot of complementarity, if there is a lot more substitutability, then you want to look at the interest rate and say if the interest rate is very high, I invest late. If the interest rate is very low, I invest early. That's the story that's going to follow. But here's really, and what we find is some form of dynamic complementarity, more common to be found than substitute, which really means that phi, this parameter phi here, is at least 0 or smaller than 0. Okay, but it's very far from this case here, which is perfect complementarity. Very, very far away from this case, but certainly not at all like this case here. So dynamic complementarity, though, is tricky because I have many friends who tell me, Flavio, my child is 5 years old, I'm done. I don't have to worry, according to you. I said, no, my friend, you got it all wrong. Because dynamic complementarity means that you want to have early and late investments around the same, more or less the same, right? The more complementarity there is, the more the same that they're going to be. So I tell them, oh, my friend, if you invested a lot early, I have bad news for you. You actually have to invest a lot late, otherwise you're going to lose the early investment that you made, okay? So this is literally what it means. Because people think dynamic complementarity means we need to only invest early. No, no. Dynamic complementarity means that the returns to late investments are higher for individuals that made high early investments. But the returns to early investments are higher for the individuals who will also have high late investments. So if you don't plan to invest a lot late in the lives of your in the human capital of your child, do not invest a lot early either, because you're going to waste a lot of the resources that you actually have. Okay, is this okay? Okay. So let me now tell you how you can actually estimate this. So there is a paper Heckman, Shenak, and I published in 2010, and we did this CS case. Okay. Now this is not a good case to discuss because from now on it wouldn't generate any closed form solution whatsoever. Fortunately, Pimenta knew about this problem in 1967, and he actually had a quadratic approximation. Now the quadratic approximation works perfectly well, but we're going to start carrying a lot of terms that are not important for our analysis. So I'm going to have a simplified version of the Pimenta approximation. I'm going to kill the quadratics in X and the quadratics in H. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm only going to work with the interaction term, because the interaction term is really the important term for estimating the dynamic complementarity. Okay, if I don't have the interaction term, I'm basically assuming Cobb-Douglas, and I don't want to do that. Okay, so here, okay, and then you can go. So these notes are going to be made available to you. So don't copy now. And some of the things I'm not going to point out, like what is the relationship between these parameters. But here are 3 problems that you have to account for when you're thinking of this problem. And the most important problem is not endogeneity of investment. Because the first thing that you should be worried about is, yes, in most settings that we observe investment in human capital, This is actually not going to come from a randomized control trial. This is going to come from something else. So clearly, it's going to be endogenous. Okay. This is for me problem number 3. It's the least important problem. Problem number 1 is that measures of human capital have no cardinality. I am talking about a production function. When I'm saying that a production function, I'm really saying I start with A, I add B, and then I end up with C. And I better be able to say that C is greater than the A I started with by some numbers, right? But if I have test scores, what do? It's like saying I have 5 units of utility, you give me $2,000 and I end up with 7 units of utility. And I say, I have 2 more units of utility? You would look at me and say, this guy is crazy. Utility is not cardinal, right? Test scores are not cardinal. When we are talking about estimating production functions, we are basically describing cardinal relationships. If the measures we're going to use don't have cardinality, forget about doing this. This is problem number 1. Okay? Problem number 2 is measurement error, especially important in early stages of the life cycle of children. Okay? And there is a very interesting combination that arises, that lack of cardinality and measurement error, that I will illustrate with a paper by Kevin Lang. And then the number 3 problem is that investment is endogenous. Okay? So let's attack problem number 1. Let me just state the problem. When we come back from the break, we'll attack this in a more formal fashion. Okay? Okay? So here's the problem. Let's talk about this. Might be difficult for some of you to read. So let me see if I can blow this up, because maybe not. So let me just describe what I have in here. Here I have types of scale as physicists describe them. Nominal, meaning this, for example, is when we have a gender, a dummy gender, and it's totally arbitrary. We say 0 for male and 1 for female, right? Right? So that's what we would say. It doesn't describe, we can say whether 2 dummy variables, the dummy variable for 2 different people are equal or different, and they're going to be equal if they have the same gender, or they're going to be different if they don't have the same gender. But it doesn't make sense to add the 2 up and then divide by 2 and say on average I have, right? This is what we call nominal. Ordinal, so ordinal is when we have objects that we can say not only they're equal or different, but they are bigger, greater than, or less than. Okay, so we can do this with utility. We can do this with test scores. We can do this with percentile scores. We can do this with any rank. We're playing the World Cup. It's going to be country number 1, country number 2, country number 3, and country number 4. But we wouldn't say the country number 1 is 50% better than many years ago. That was the case. We can't say that the country number 1 is 50% better than country number 2, 30% better than country. Makes no sense whatsoever. Okay. Then we have interval scales that are cardinal. And then these are objects that can be placed in equally spaced units, but they don't have a true 0 point. Okay? So not only we can say they're equal and different, less than or greater than, but we can also add and subtract. And the typical example is educational attainment, because what we say grade 1 really is something arbitrary. So arbitrary that in some countries grade 1 happens at different ages. In some countries happens earlier than other countries. And in some countries grade 1 in some years it started when kids were 7, and then they actually transformed the system, and now it starts at age 6, and in some countries it starts at age 5. So there is no true 0. The same thing is the world should, the year 2018 in which we are is truly arbitrary, because it truly is not 2018, right? As Armin explained to me yesterday, and I was shocked. What? Right? So 2018 It's just because someone decided that 2018 years ago it was 0, but many people don't agree with it. Just ask the Chinese, right? So that is something that we know. And then you have what they call ratio scales, which are also, interval scales, but they do have a true 0. Okay? And the typical thing is earnings. 0 earnings has a meaning, right? 0 earnings means you make $0, which means that you can purchase exactly 0 unless you have an income transfer. Okay? It's also length, right? There is a notion of two objects being at distance 0. It's also age, right? There is 0 age, which is time in which we were born. Here's the problem. This is what we actually observe. This is what we need, either this or this. Okay, we need to have a cardinal representation of test scores in order for us to be able to estimate production functions of human capital. If we don't have cardinal representations, we can't do it. And you know what else we can't do if we don't have cardinal representations? What else? We can't do even value added, which we do every day by looking at test scores. But if you look at physicists are going to tell you that if you have test scores, whether they are standardized test scores or percentile scores, there are 4 operations that you can say, operators that you can use. You can use equal, different, less than, greater than. But you can't say, I start with this, I added this, because addition is something else. Addition requires cardinality. Yes, go ahead.
But there's a difference between the measure and the skill, because in test scores, like giving 2 correct answers and giving 4 correct answers, 4 correct answers is exactly 2 times.
No, it's not.
In terms of answers.
No, it's not.
Ability.
No, it's not. Oh, in terms of answers, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
This is my point to say there's a measure and there's the ability we want.
No, but let me. Here is the problem. I agree with your statement. Your statement is true. Your statement is, I have a test with 4 items. A child that answers 1 correct and a child that answers 4 correct. Well, one answered 4 times more than the other, right? Right.
In terms of items, right?
Okay, but here's the problem. When I construct a test, I have a construct in mind, a certain skill that I actually have in mind, and this construct of skills, there is a population of items that represent this. Then what I do is I replace the 4 items that you gave me with 4 different items, and then what might happen with this thing is the one that is scored 1 in the new items, they score 4, and the one that is scored 4 in the new test scores 1. So your assessment is true, but there is a reason why we don't work with this type of representation of skills, because when we just count the number of items that we have, doesn't necessarily reproduce the difficulty of all items that we have that is designed to actually measure this construct that we are interested in. Yeah, go ahead.
So just maybe
Okay.
from a different field, but wouldn't you just solve that by like estimating an underlying latent factor that is
No. No, it doesn't. See, you're thinking of an IRT. Is that what? Yeah. So there is one IRT version that satisfies, that is interval, okay, which is an IRT model that is 1 parameter. 1 parameter IRT model, there is a transformation of that model that produces something that has an interval scale representation. Let's go back to our imaginary world. I don't have like a blackboard. Okay, so here's the thing.
Sorry.
Yes.
Explain what IRT stands for.
Oh, IRT is very simple. IRT is factor scores. You know factor scores? Okay, so suppose that factor scores, what factor scores do is the following. I have many different tests and, that I took, okay? And then what I want to do is each one of these tests have represent not only my true human capital, but some random thing that happened. You know, the dog barked, and you see what I'm saying? So, which we're going to call measurement error. What the factor score does is to say, let's look at the correlation across these tests, because the correlation is going to capture the true ability, but the measurement area is going to be something orthogonal to it. Okay? IRT is exactly this, but now your measures are not continuous; they're binary, or they take on a small discrete number of values. Okay? The typical case is 0, 1. 0, you got the question wrong. 1, you got the question right. Okay? Now, one parameter IRT does have an interval representation, but let's go back to our world that we had there. In this world here, I have a bunch of items, a bunch of questions that represent, that capture the ability that I am interested in. A subset of those questions satisfy the conditions for one parameter IRT. A subset, the remaining doesn't. It requires 2 parameters or 3 parameters that then no longer have. If you have an IRT with 2 parameters or 3 parameters, you're back in this world. Yes, you are. I know, it's a shock, but it's true. And I can prove to you why. And the reason why I can prove to you why is because when you have a two parameter IRT, what is a difficult item for you is not necessarily what is a difficult item for me, which goes back to the kind of issue that he was raising. If I have 4 questions, one gets 2 right, the other gets 4 right. One has 2 more questions than the other. But if the items that characterize the construct have this property that some items that are easier for you than they are easier for me, then if I select 4 different items, I might have a higher score than you. And if I select 4 other items, you might have a higher score than me.
So when you say like 2-parameter IRT model, you mean one where the item difficulties vary
across items.
Vary
across items, not across individuals. It's only necessary that it varies across items. It's not only the difficulty, it's also the discrimination parameter varies across items. Yeah. That's what I mean. So you have, because the one IRT, the one parameter IRT, items have different difficulty, but they all have the same sensibility.
Like the Rush model.
The Rush model is the classic example that would generate you an interval scale. When you have 2 parameters, the probability for one test goes this way, the probability for the other test goes this way, the probability for the other test goes this way, and then you no longer have a scale that is going to be interval. Happy to show, if you're interested, I'm happy to describe this in more detail to you. So this is number 1, because if we can't join, why can't we do value added? Well, value added is what? Well, I start with some skills, I assign some teacher, this guy gets some more skills. But if there is no cardinality in test scores, what can you say about how much skills you're actually adding? It's fantastic, but there are people that can show that if you actually compute value added, accounting for the fact that what you have are ordinal skills, you actually have very different characterizations of who are good teachers and who are bad teachers. And it's easy to do this. You know how it's easy? What you do is you say, let's pair students that are the same. When they started, they have the same skills when they started, let's say, 5th grade. But they were assigned to 2 different teachers. Now, let's say that 2 different teachers have many different students that are actually the same. So the typical situation is you go into a school and you randomly assign kids to teachers. That would satisfy this condition if most of the inequality is within school. Okay? Then what you do is you say, you compare what is the probability that one student in this class is above another student in that other class. Then you can compute a value added in terms of probability. This is the probability that teacher A is better than teacher B. But it's not telling you in terms of scores, test scores, because you can't, there is no, you're comparing ordinal relationships. You can say whether one is greater than the other, but it doesn't make sense to say what is the difference between them. You can't do addition, you can't do subtraction. Okay, I missed some early investment in human capital for language. Sorry about that. We have this problem, right? Which test scores we can do addition and subtraction, and this is exactly what we want to do. We want to do addition and subtraction, right? So the way I'm going to solve this, we're going to solve this problem is not by looking at ordinal methods like the way people were, the way I was telling you that you can account for value added of teachers, because it wouldn't work in this particular case. I really want to estimate a production function, and I want to have an interval scale measure, or if possible, even a ratio scale measure. If I have ratio scale measure, I would be even in better shape than an interval scale. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at earnings or some adult outcomes. But today I want to, for the purpose of this presentation, I want to tell you that I'm going to redo everything that is measured in terms of test scores, but is going to be transformed in terms of earnings. Okay, here's how we're going to do it. What I am interested in is human capital at every point in time of a children's life. If you remember the equation that I'm trying to estimate, is this equation here. Human capital at the beginning of the next period is a function of human capital at the beginning of this period plus the amount of investment that my child is going to get plus an interaction term. This interaction term is important for me to look at dynamic complementarity, right? Plus some error term. By the way, this error term here, we can model this in very flexible way. We can break this down in permanent and transitory components. I'm not going to do it today, but it is important to do that, especially when you're concerned about endogeneity, okay? So this is the animal that I want to study, and the problem is this guy here doesn't have a metric, a cardinal scale. This one does because it's either time or money. Right? It's the amount of minutes parents spend in interaction with kids, or the amount of dollars that they spend on resources. So this one is fine. Sometimes it's not fine when the data that you have are some form of index. Then you would have to worry about getting cardinality for this item here. And this is the same problem. It doesn't have cardinal representation. So this is the problem that I'm trying to solve. So now I'm going to say, what is human capital? Okay. So I'm going to say that human capital at age t corresponds to the log earnings at some point in time. I want you to be sure about what I'm saying and what about I'm not saying. Okay? So I'm saying that the human capital of a child at age 3 is the earnings that child is going to have when that child is adult. Okay? So if the earnings that child is going to have is $80,000, I'm not saying that if I get the 3-year-old to the labor market now, the 3-year-old will make $80,000. I'm saying that the child has a human capital, is on a path of human capital accumulation, that once that child becomes an adult person, that child would have the equivalent earnings of $80,000, okay? That's the representation that I want to, the interpretation of the data that I want you to have. Instead of earnings, I can do years of education, which is cardinal interval scale, and would satisfy the condition. But to make this as simple as possible, and why as simple as possible? Log earnings, assuming that log earnings is normal, has a normal distribution, is not so bad. Okay, the mean is going to be fixed, but the variance is not, and it's important that the variance is not going to be fixed because measuring human capital when the child is 3 years old is much more difficult than measuring human capital when the child is 15 years old. So the component that of earnings that is going to be picked up by test scores at age 3 is going to have a lot more things here that we would like. So this is why I'm going to, and the mean, by the way, could change as well, but right now I'm going to fix the mean because that's not so important. Okay, so the mean is fixed at some age, but the variance is allowed to change. Okay, and this is crucial for the story that I want to tell, because I want to make sure that I don't say that the informational content of a test at age 3 is the same as the informational content of when the child is 15 years old. Okay, so then obviously this has mean 0, and let's say it's also normal. Then obviously it's going to be the case that log earnings has some mean equal to the mean of this guy, and then has some variance, which is the variability that is true variability in terms of human capital, plus some variability that are things orthogonal to human capital measured at HT. Everyone with me? Okay.
Okay, but you have to know the variances, right? Otherwise, this is.
Oh yes, and we will know everything. I promise you, we will know. We will know everything. Yes, yes, we will know everything. I promise you. Okay. So here's what's going to happen. So here's what we have. What we have is some tests. Let's say that they're standardized so that the mean is 0 and the variance is 1. Doesn't matter what they are. It could be percentile, it could nothing. Okay. This is just what we observe. And then I'm going to say, let's assume that it's linear because I want to get closed form solutions in everything that I'm going to get, that I'm going to derive. Let's say that test scores is a function of the human capital, is a measure of human capital, but it's not unbiased measure of human capital. The difference between these two that I'm saying here is this is an unbiased measure of human capital. It has some classical measurement error, but it's unbiased. Okay. And by the way, I can change this too. I'm not going to change this too because it would bring additional parameters that I would need to estimate, but we could do this. But this guy here, what is important is after I define what this term here is, then this test score is the element that I want to have multiplied by a parameter that I don't know the value. Then I add another parameter I don't know the value, and then I add an error term that I don't know the value. So far I am doing great because I don't know this guy, I don't know this guy. I certainly don't know this guy because this guy is a combination of something that I don't observe and something that I don't observe, right? And then on top of it I have another measurement error. Fantastic. I'm doing great, right? So you'd say, oh, this is easy. Okay. So I'm assuming normality everywhere. It doesn't need to assume normality. Okay. So this can be made more general. But here's what's going to happen. The test score is normal with some mean and then some variance. And I know nothing about this so far. Okay. And in particular, once I condition on if I knew someone's skills at age t, then I would know that the mean should be this number. Then I would know this guy, but I still don't know this. And then the variance would be only variance of measurement error. Okay? But I don't observe HIT for anyone. Here's what I'm going to do. Suppose that I could do some non-parametric regression of y on m. Okay? What I would get is the following relationship. Well, because I have made normality assumptions everywhere, what I'm going to get is a transformed version of the test score, which would be almost what I am interested in. And it's not exactly what I am interested in because of this term here. Let me tell you why. This is the term that I know. This is the regression that I have. From the regression, I can predict this guy here, which is this element plus this element here. I'm going to replace I'm going to replace m. What is m? M is this term. I'm going to now plug this equation here in here. The alpha is going to cancel. I'm going to go away. I'm going to keep the beta, right? Oh, sorry. I'm going to, the beta is going to stay here, which is fine. Oh, sorry, it's in here. So now just plug this guy in here. Alpha goes away. Then I'm going to get S times beta times ln of age. And then I'm going to get S times epsilon. And then I'm going to divide everything by beta. If I knew beta, I would be doing great, but I don't know beta. So I have to estimate this guy now, okay? And I can now estimate this guy. Here's why. Okay, so we don't observe ln of hi, but what do we observe? We observe this term here. Replace, this is almost sacrilege, but let's do this anyway. Replace age with ln of yi minus nu it in here. And now I'm going to get this term that I actually observe, but I'm also going to capture this error term in ln of yi. Okay? which is a problem because if I regress this term on yi, this is correlated with this, which would produce a biased biased estimate of ST1. Can't do it. But I have a few candidates. Here's what I can do. I can't do OLS, but I can do some form of IV. One way that I can do IV is I can look at investments at period t-1. Why? Well, investments at period t-1 would be correlated with HIT, but not with this term, so it would be okay. I may not observe investments, or investments may be endogenous, which would create a different type of problem, but I can look at determinants of investments at period t-1. For example, suppose that you have an intervention in which you randomly assign people to control and treatment, and the guys in the treatment group end up having higher levels of investment and therefore higher levels of skills. That would also work as an instrument for log of yi. The other problem is if you don't have either this or this, then you have to have either more periods or more measures of the same thing that you are interested in, but then you need additional assumptions. In which case, you could use some other test at some other time, or some other test at the same time, but a different test, assuming that measurement error across tests are not correlated, and then obtain ST1. Now, I'm going to assume that you have one of these three here. In our paper, for this part, we actually assume this third condition here. Okay, we needed to use IV to address endogeneity of investment to begin with. So now we use one of these instruments to identify ST1, and then you're going to redefine the scaled version of your test scores, which now is a test score but measuring the metric of money. Okay, that's what's measured now. Okay, so one standard deviation now has some earnings component to it. So you can say someone is $3,000 away from the mean, above the mean, or $3,000 below the mean. That's what we actually got. And what you're going to get under these assumptions is the measure of the test score now written in terms of dollars, an intercept term, the human capital that you are interested in. This is with 1 in here, which you now know it's 1. You don't have to actually estimate it. And some error term whose variance depends not only on the variance of epsilon, but also beta square. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
So you use data from when this cohort actually is 45, or is this also possible to use another?
So you would like to use data for the same cohort, which is a problem.
Yeah.
Because
you need to
this is particularly problematic if tests are changing over time, which sometimes they do. So sometimes the school districts change tests, which might affect the relationship between measures of human capital, tests, and the outcomes that you are interested in.
But it also has to do when we have observed children nowadays, we would make a prediction about technological change and other stuff.
Sure.
As monitorizers.
Sure. Absolutely true. But that doesn't mean that the outcome has to come 30 years down the road. The outcome might be a year down the road in the following sense. Probability that the child is actually going to be held back. That has cardinality to it, because someone who has a probability of 50% is twice as likely as someone that has a probability of 25%. Okay? The only problem is if they're changing the policy for holding children back. Then you would have a problem with that again. Okay? Which means that for each one of the cohorts, you would have to estimate what that relationship is. But I like about the question because it allows me to say something else. This relationship here doesn't need to be exactly as I'm writing, because this can be something like a binary indicator, in which case it would be a nonlinear relationship, a nonlinear anchoring equation. Okay, this is what we call anchoring equation. It doesn't have to be linear. It can be nonlinear as well. And if it is nonlinear, what should happen is, you see what I wrote in here, ln of HIT? When you do the transformation, you're going to end up with something that is ln of HIT. And if what I have in here is a nonlinear relationship, which is going to be, let's say, the probability that this plus this is greater than some number tau, what you end up with here has to be exactly the same thing. The probability that this plus an error term is greater than, okay? So whatever relationship you impose in the original anchoring equation, it has to show up in the relationship between test scores and the cardinality that you imposed. Theodora? Oh, okay. So here's, and this matters, okay? This matters big time. So a few years ago, people were saying that there was no increase in inequality in skills until children actually started school. What they were doing is they were saying, this is the, we see this in CNLSY as well. Reading recognition, reading comprehension. I showed you math, which the reason why I showed you math is because I knew that math is more stable in that sense. But here's what people were saying. The gap between black and white, when kids start school, is only 0.2, it's only 20%, this is in percentiles, so this is only 20 percentile points. But right after they start school and they are in grade 2, this goes up to 60 percentile points. So the difference is small at age 5 and suddenly becomes very large when kids, 2 years after the kids actually are in school. This is true for reading recognition, and it's also true for reading comprehension, although for reading comprehension the change is not so great. There's a problem with the reading comprehension test in the CNLSY. A lot of people don't use it because you only do the reading comprehension test if you actually can do the reading recognition test, and a lot of the kids who fail the reading recognition test are not capturing the reading comprehension test. So this is why this looks smaller, but it's just capturing the problem. See, this is the problem of having tests that actually have no difference in terms of meaning. Okay? What is 20 percentile points difference when the kids are 2 years old versus 20 percentile points when the kids are 5 years old, 10 years old, 80 years old? Okay? So you can do, Bonn and Lang do exactly what we call anchoring. Okay? They transform the test scores into a metric linked to education attainment, exactly in the way that I described to you. Okay? And you know what happens when they do that? Here's what happens. The difference is, now they transform this from percentile points, which is an ordinal scale, to differences in education attainment. In reading recognition, differences in reading recognition basically constant over time. Differences in reading comprehension basically constant over time. Remember the parallel gaps I showed to you? For you to obtain the parallel gaps, you better be thinking about the fact that ordinal scales cannot be compared over time in terms of gains. They can be compared over time in terms of bigger, smaller, but never in terms of a few points greater, a few points smaller. Yeah, go ahead.
So is this not solved by just like standardizing each test?
No, because so the problem with the test when the kids are very young, very important. They are not, each item is not equally informative about future outcomes. As children age, the differences in tests become more and more difficult. Therefore, they become more and more representative, informative about the human capital that people have. But early on, the tests contain things like the child can move the head. Well, you see what I'm saying? So this is what's going on. So it doesn't solve the problem, because basically what you want to, and here is why. Basically, you need to make sure that you write the tests in a way so that at every age, at least one test, it doesn't have to be all, but at least one test has this relationship with a measure of human capital that is tied to some well-defined outcome. And what I mean by well-defined outcome is that it's an outcome that has a cardinal metric. And once you do that, two things are going to happen. Measurement error is going to show up in here, right? Because different very early on, there's going to be a lot of measurement error in here, but there is also going to be a lot of measurement error in here as well, because these tests are going to be tests that they are very difficult to predict what the future productivity of these individuals are going to be. Okay? This is why this is going on. So this is, I call this the problem number one, because if you don't have a metric that has cardinal value, forget about doing most of the work in human capital, whether it happens in school or whether it happens with families. Okay, so very few things can be done if you're working with ordinal representations, and in this case, you better adopt ordinal methods to do the analysis, not cardinal methods. Okay, okay. So problem number two: measures of human capital and investment have measurement error, and here I'm going to work with latent factors. So now I have one test that is tied, that I transformed, right? I transformed so that it has a natural metric, a cardinal representation. It represents exactly the thing that I want to capture in here, right? There's this term here, that's okay. I can estimate this term. I'm not going to show it to you how, but you know, it's not going to be too difficult to do this. And the reason why is simple, because you observe, oh no, I'm gonna let you do this, right? I mean, this is like yeah, you can do this. Then I have all these other tests. Maybe I have 2, 3, 4 other tests that I don't need to do the transformation for each one of them. I might. Maybe I want to do the transformation. It's really not important whether I do it or not, because I already have one that is written in the metric that I want it to be written, that has the scale that is a cardinal scale, and then everything else I can actually identify now. So I don't need to do this representation. So I'm going to now rewrite everything in some matrix form. Okay? So I have at every point, for every individual, at every point in time, this is a vector. I have, I don't know, 5 test scores, and I have 5 different measures of investments. Okay? So, and okay, this is what's going on. And then, when you go to to typical statistical packages, you can choose to do factor analysis, and you can choose to produce factor scores. Most statistical packages, and I don't know the history why, when you ask to produce statistical the score factors, it produces a biased version of the scores. I don't know why they do it, which drives me crazy. So if you have an option, choose Bartlett, because Bartlett scores are unbiased. Okay, at least they are unbiased. They have the reason why is I think that the reason why is because the regression scores have less measurement error, but they are biased. This one's here, the Bartlett scores, which take this formulation here, I'm going to move away from this for a second, actually are unbiased. So you factor analyze the data, you produce the Bartlett scores, which are equal to the things you are interested in, plus some measurement error. Okay? Now, a bad idea is this is the equation I want to estimate, and then I'm going to replace this guy here with the Bartlett score, with this guy here, and this guy here. Okay, and it's a bad idea to do this because of measurement error. This one having measurement error here, and this one is not so much of a problem. It's going to affect the standard errors against you, but it's not going to affect the consistency of the estimators. But replacing this guy with something that is equal to this term plus a measurement error will cause this guy here to be what? Attenuated, right? And replacing ln of h with ln of hb, the same thing, attenuated, right? And what about this guy here? Which has an interaction term. I'll let you figure this out. Okay, so lots of homework. Can we do homework? No, just kidding. Okay, so suppose that I actually observed everything, right? So I could write this in HT, and I would say this is the dependent variable, and WT is the independent variable. And then gamma t are the parameters I want to estimate. And then I could write HT plus 1 is WT gamma t plus eta t plus 1. Then if I observed H and I observed W, and investment is exogenous, which I'm going to walk away from in a minute, then I could just do OLS, and then the OLS would be consistent because I would have everything fine. The problem is if I have instead of the H and the W, I had HB and WB. Well, WB has whatever I am interested in plus measurement error, right? And now what I would get is some of the parameters would be upward biased, some of the parameters would be downward biased, and it's going to be because of the interaction term. Okay, so that doesn't work. Here's where these things show up. The bias is going to be entirely because of this matrix, this element, this matrix here. This is not going to bring any bias to your analysis. So let's compare WTB transpose WTB with WT transpose WT. Okay, so this is prelim of WT transpose WT, and then the prelim of WT Bartlett transpose WT Bartlett. This is what you can recover from the factor analysis. This is what you would like to recover from the factor analysis. Okay? And then what you're going to get is this guys here, which is exactly what you want. And what you can recover, though, is these guys here, but they have components that are biasing your analysis. Here you have one, here you have another one, here you have another one, here you have another one, and here you have a big one. Okay? And if you do this in a non-parametric way, this issue is not going to go away, I promise you. Linearity, normality is not causing the problem. Okay? But it's interesting because I actually recover, when I do the factorial analysis, I recover this matrix, I recover this matrix. This moment here I know because this is this comes from the anchoring that I did before. I recover this matrix from the factor analysis. This I know because I know the scale of investment. It's either time or money. This I recover from factor analysis, and this I also recover from the factor analysis. So I know all the elements that I need to know in order to do an unbiased estimation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define the matrix A, which is the elements that I have in here minus the matrices that is with the elements that are causing bias. And when I do this, this is going to be a consistent estimator. Okay. So what's going on here? Measurement error causes things to be biased. We agree on that, right? But the difference when you're doing estimation of human capital production functions is that many times you don't have one test score. Many times you have several different test scores. And if you make assumptions about measurement error across tests for a given person, and they don't have to be independent, but you have to assume some form of uncorrelation at least between two of them, you can recover all of the parameters that you need to recover in order for you to undo the bias, which is different from the typical discussion of classical measurement error, because in the classical measurement error, we have only one measure. We don't have multiple measures. We have only one measure of the x that is actually measured with error. But if you have more than one measure of x that is measured with error, with assumptions about the nature of the measurement error, you can actually undo the bias, okay? And it's important. So this is, I don't know if you can see this, but this is, blue is good, yellow is bad, okay? Blue is the share of variability that is due to true human capital, and yellow is measurement error in this metric of human capital. So when kids are young, what? This is 30%. Then you have like a weighted birth and gestation length that is a little bit better. But the tests when the kids are really young, full of measurement error. When they age, you have some tests that actually have almost 80% information content and only 20% measurement error. Okay, which would explain why people find, oh, there is no inequality early on. Inequality is increasing at later ages. Well. Basically, the tests at early ages are just measurement error, and if if you have tests that are perfect measurement error, and measurement error is independent across socioeconomic classes, then there shouldn't be any difference across classes to begin with. So measurement error is actually biased defining downwards. But this is cognitive tests, which people have worked for 100 years to get them right, and still we are far away from getting that right. Then we have some other tests that less than 10%. And then we have, as kids age, become a little bit better. Then you have investments, which are truly horrific. So if I were to be concerned about doing problems with estimating the coefficient on investment, this is why I say that endogeneity is the least of your problems. The most serious problems is measurement error. Yeah?
How much of this depends on the anchoring function?
No, it doesn't. So this, yes. Well, let me.
In the sense of outcomes. So we're talking about skills.
Yeah.
That somehow have a representation on the market.
Yes, I'll go there. I'll go there. Let me tell you that the amount of measurement error, this figure is not too sensitive, but there is something else that is going to be very sensitive. Okay, yeah.
But I find that conceptually, I mean, one of the things here is also that you are imposing that there is one latent factor that is some investment eyes. Yeah, obviously, like these are great measures of what they're measuring, right? Books or musical shows, but like we would never even hope that these measures measure the same thing because they do measure different things, right? So what I'm trying to say is the investment is also multidimensional, right? So part of these yellow bars,
yes,
they're imposing a really
So we have so many measures that we actually broke this down into more than one investment and more than one socio-emotional factor.
Then by definition, it's going to become more informative of that.
It does, but it doesn't affect the production function of human capital, which might be pointing to something about the nature of measurement error more than whether it's a different factor whatsoever. Okay, happy to talk more to you about it. I'm just not going to spend too much time on this. Okay, in other words, what's failing here is the assumption that measurement error is completely uncorrelated across all measures of investment. Okay, they are not, and it's okay. But happy to talk to you more about this. We actually have this in the appendix in the paper. Okay, so so investment. So this is endogeneity. Endogeneity is when you're doing this type of analysis, the best that you can hope to do. Well, the first thing that you're going to do, now it has to become almost a religion, right? The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to get cardinal representation of test scores. The second thing is you're going to address measurement error. And the third thing is you're going to address endogeneity of investments. The best thing that you can do is look at randomized controlled trials that also measure investment, because that's going to be the best instrument that you can get in this type of studies. It's very hard to come across data sets. For example, in the preschool, unfortunately, we don't actually have measures of investment. So we can't estimate a production function for the preschool or the Bessedarian because they didn't actually measure investments that children were exposed to. So we can't do this. People who are doing better now are Orazio Attanasio and his colleagues. They are doing a lot of early childhood interventions in developing countries, and they're very good at measuring not only the impact on human capital, measures of human capital, but also measures of investments. And really is first order when you look at the estimates when you account for endogeneity. But the bias is actually different from the type of bias we usually expect to have. And I think that the nature is because of something related to the decomposition of this error term. Usually we would expect that high ability children would get high levels of investment, and if we don't address endogeneity, that this coefficient is going to be too high, right? Let's forget for now this interaction term so that there is no confusion about what I'm saying. Okay? So in other words, children that have lots of unobserved skills, permanent skills, tend to have a lot more investment. If I don't account for the endogeneity, I'm going to have upward bias in our estimates of psi T1. But what really seems to be the case is that when you decompose this error term here in permanent and temporary shocks, what's driving the relationship between x and the error term doesn't seem to be so much the permanent shock, it's more the temporary shock. And what's going on is children that have really very bad temporary shocks tend to have a lot higher investments, which then they show bias. The bias is not upwards, the bias is downwards, okay? Which is interesting because along the way, when you have measurement error, bias downwards. When you have endogeneity, the bias seems to be downward as well. And when you account for endogeneity, both because of endogeneity of decisions, but also endogeneity due to a measurement error, they find a much larger estimate of psi, okay? So these are the three problems. Here's where your question comes into hand. Here's what is sensitive. When we did the anchoring, we did anchoring in educational attainment. That was one outcome that we anchored on. And the other outcome that we anchored on was number of crimes committed by the individual. We should have weighted different crimes differently. Yeah, go ahead.
Two questions. So, one with educational attainment, equal spacing, I have my doubts. And crimes.
Yeah.
Is this crimes detected, arrested?
No, this is crimes reported, which, okay, crimes reported. You can go if you have many different. The problem is it's going to be downward biased. That's the problem. We can't do anything about that because we didn't have administrative data on crime. But even administrative data on crime.
Because the arrests are not equal across. I mean,
no, of course not.
Police is not equally searching neighborhoods.
Not only that, people that have different levels of cognitive and non-cognitive skills may not only commit different types of crimes, etc., 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 right? But education attainment is a variable that we use everywhere in our analysis. We regress income on education attainment, counting as years. So I mean, I understand, but there's
test scores everywhere. I mean,
and we shouldn't. But one, I can say, here's what I can say. Someone that has 8 years of education has 4 more years of education than someone that has 4 years of education, but it doesn't mean that it has 2 times more amounts of human capital. And the reason why I can't do it is because of the nature of the scale. Years of education is an interval scale, it's not a ratio scale, okay? And when I do the transformation here, Chris, when I do this transformation, it's not necessarily telling you that someone that has 8 years of education is going to have, versus someone that is going to have 4 times the amount of. It's not. This is the entire notion that this guy here, for different periods, might actually have very different informational content. Okay, but okay. So let me just say this though. What I wanted to say is the following: socio-emotional skills are super important to explain aggressive behavior and behavior related to crime. Okay. They're going to be important also to explain educational attainment, but not as important in order to explain things related to crime. Cognitive skills are going to be more important to explain differences in educational attainment, not so important to explain differences in crime. Okay? Here's the interesting component though. Socio-emotional development, a lot of it is associated with parts of the brain that start to mature at age 0 and only finish to mature at age 25. And cognitive development is associated with certain parts of the brain that start to develop early at age 0, but it stops to develop at age 8 or 9. Okay? Some forms of cognitive development. One, for example, is language. I've been talking to you and you realize that I have a strong English accent. My German accent is even worse. And part of it is because I was exposed to English at a much later age. Now, not all parts of language is the same. So I can still acquire a lot of vocabulary, even though I started learning English at a later age, I can still acquire some proficiency in grammar, even though I was exposed to English at a later age. But it's much more difficult to get rid of my accent once I am exposed to English at age 20 than if I were exposed to English at age 5. Okay? And this is reflected in here. Because the computation that we wanted to do is, suppose that we want first, we have a society that has a certain amount of resources, a lot of kids, and we want to maximize aggregate education across all kids. Okay? We wanted to have the society that is the most educated society that we can have, given the resources that we have. Okay? This would lead to a level of investment, ratio of early to late investment, on average, that would be 50% larger. Now, this is misleading just because we don't actually have any good measure of school inputs in our data. So we are not counting for school inputs. So we're only accounting for parental inputs. So in that world, that if we want to maximize aggregate education, a lot more should go to early versus late, because early parental investments seem to be particularly impactful for the production of cognitive skills that are particularly impactful for the formation of educational attainment. If I wanted to have a society that minimizes aggregate crime, then what I would like to do is to invest more on skills related to socio-emotional development. But these skills, they don't actually stop forming at early ages. They form at early ages and they form at later ages. And therefore, the optimal amount would be to invest more in an equally fashion way.
I'm confused, but because you said like the cognitive skills like mature like earlier, or like so the example you had was like language, but there are like lots of cognitive skills. I mean, I would count it like the executive functions and so on. They are part of the cognitive skills, and you capture them.
Yes, because you're a psychologist.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Until like 25 or something. So
exactly. But economists would never say that executive functions are part of cognitive skills.
But they are.
I know. Exactly. So there are a few things that I can't do because I can't go back in time. Okay. One of them is I would never call executive functions non-cognitive skills. Because actually, if anything, they're highly cognitive skills. Exactly. So think of, when I'm saying socio-emotional skills, think of executive functions. Okay?
What do you mean by cognitive skills? It's just like
I mean like language, yes. I mean things that we could measure, in standardized tests that schools do. Reading, math, etc.
But they capture so much executive functions.
As well. Yeah. Exactly, as well. So they capture both cognitive and what I'm calling executive functions, for sure. Especially if you're looking at GPAs instead of, for example, standardized tests. Exactly. But there is a difference. Thank you for raising this question. There is a difference in what we call cognitive versus what psychologists would call cognitive. Happy to talk more about this.
I'm confused that you say that. So you're saying that like reading tests or something would be a measure of cognitive skills?
In our work it would. Here it would be. You could have that, for sure, yes. That would be less biased to, more related to what they would call cognitive skills, natural cognitive skills, for sure. But in our data, we don't actually have. Okay, that's why. Okay.
Sorry, what's early and what's late?
Early is anything before age 6, and late is everything after age 6.
Okay, and you don't allow for the fact there could be some U-shaped relationship between
Oh, you can, yes. You could, yeah. This figure here is done not under the linearity assumptions that I described. Okay, but I'm not. But I don't have. So I can give the paper, but the paper will not. The problem in the paper is that at a time we thought that the anchoring thing was so important that we devoted 2 paragraphs in an online appendix to it. And I mean it was important because we realized, oh my God, we need to write an entire paper only on this topic. Mm-hmm. But because it took us 6 years to finish this paper, actually 7 years to finish this paper, by the time that we finished the paper, we had forgotten about how important the anchoring was, so we never wrote the other paper. But anchoring is truly, if there is anything about my talk that I need you to have with you forever, until the day you die, is that when you look at test scores, remember, you're looking at an ordinal scale do not add, do not subtract at all, because that completely bias anything. It has no meaning and completely bias the results that you can have. Okay, so if anything, okay. So let me tell you, why am I here? Okay, so here's. Okay, so until what time do I go? 12:30. Okay, so let me tell you, a lot of the early work that I was interested in doing when I graduated was trying to understand this inequality in investments. Why is there so much inequality in investments? And the number one reason seemed to be income. Because you see high-income families investing a lot, low-income families invest a little. That would be, if I gave low-income families a lot of income, that would actually lead to a lot of. Okay, so bad news, I didn't find that. Okay, so bad news. And then to make my day even worse, because I thought I just wasted 6 years of my PhD and didn't find an answer. And then I found this book by Hart and Risley. Okay, so this is what they did. Every day for 3 years, they recorded 1 hour of talking time between parents and children in the home, okay, with a tape recorder. So a research assistant would go to the home and follow the child with this tape. Yes, you know, and Hart and Risley say, and we wanted really people to believe that this guy was, you know, like a fly on the wall, which is like really very hard to believe. And then they brought back the tape, and then 3 people listened to the tape, transcribed until they all agreed that what was there, what 3 people agreed that was there. Okay. Here's what they found. The story that they want to tell is this. This is the number of words children had different words children had spoken at every point in time. So you come to my house, I'm 9 months old, I say mom, that's 1 word. When you come back and I say mom and car, it's 2 words. And 11 months, if I say mom and car again, it's only 2 words, not 3, okay? So this literally is listing all the words that children had spoken and then counting the number of different words in that list and then averaging across socioeconomic groups. And then what they found is that by age 36 months, the number of words that these 6 welfare children had expressed was the same number of words that the high-income children had expressed at age 2 years. So that in one way, this is a metric of development that shows that low-income 3-year-old children have a vocabulary size that is 1 year delayed in comparison to the high-income children. And what produces, according to Hart and Risley, this disparity is the quality of the language environment they were exposed to. This is one picture that summarizes their findings. So this is the number of adult words expressed around the child, not necessarily to the child, which is not what you want to measure. But this is one thing that they measured. The low-income children at a high talking time of the day, they heard about 750 words. The high-income children already started at 1,500 words and then increased over time. Okay, so the difference in the investment as measured in language, as measured by adult words expressed around the child, we don't even know if it was to the child, is not only large, but it's increasing. By the way, I'm talking to you at a rate of about 300 words per minute. So in 2 minutes of my talking to you, you've heard more than an hour of the high talking time of these kids. Okay, so the story that they want to say in the 1980s when they did this research is language. If we can get a low-income child to be exposed to this environment, then we can get the vocabulary path of this of the low-income child to move closer to the vocabulary path of that other child. They did a small experiment and they found something regular, something along those lines. And then the child was sent back to the same environment as before, no talking, and child returned to regress. Okay, so which seems that language development is not the first year, is not only the first few months of a child's life, it's actually something more than just the first few months. So this led me to think of different ways of trying to understand why there is inequality in investments in human capital. I want to present two explanations for you. One explanation is related to the type of utility functions that we should be thinking of when we're thinking of child development. And here's one. So normally, what we would have is something along these lines. Parents care about consumption and parents care about the child's human capital. Okay, let's think of a one period problem. Okay, let's say that parents can raise the child until the child is 2 years old, then the child has to be sent to some institution that the parents have no control over. That's the thought experiment that I actually have. Okay? Here's what I want to put in here, something else, which is, this is an indicator function, and it only turns on if the human capital of the child is below what parents consider is normal development. Okay? In other words, if I think that my child is going to be below what I think is normal for her age, then I really become worried about my child's human capital. If I predict that my child's human capital is not going to be as high, as low, it's going to be above this level, then I am not so worried about my child's human capital. Okay? I'll go through this in a second. This is budget constraint. Parent has some income, can decide whether to use this for consumption or for investment. Let's just say that all investment here is material. Okay? Adding time would not add any new insight to the problem. Only bring more complication in terms of variables. And then I have a production function that I'm going to assume is called Douglas. Okay, not so bad. A lot of people estimate that the production function is going to be, at early age, is going to be something like a Cobb-Douglas, meaning that the interaction term here is going to be not going to be there. Okay? Okay, so this is the human capital when the child is born. This is the investment the parents are going to make. This is the human capital the child is going to have at the end of the period, and then the child is shipped to some institution. Okay. So what is the parents' information set? We have to think about this. Is the parents know the price, the income, the price of investment, income, the human capital of the child when the child is born, every shock that shows up in the production function of human capital. The parents have beliefs about what constitute normal development for them. And the parents have beliefs about what they think the production function of human capital is. Okay? Normally, we would just assume parents know the production function and parents don't care about how their children compare to typical children in their neighborhood. This is where I want to move away from. So if I go to the typical model, I don't get this component here, and parents know gamma 0, gamma 1, and gamma 2. I combine the budget constraint with the human capital constraint. In the horizontal axis, I have child development. In the vertical axis, I have consumption. This constraint here looks curved because it's a combination of budget and the production function of human capital. That's why it's curved like that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. And then this is the preference, and parents would choose a point in which the two of them are actually tangent, as we know. If I have beliefs about the production function, in particular if I think that investments don't produce as much human capital as we know it does, then the parent is acting under the assumption that even though this is the constraint that the parent faces, the parent believes that the constraint that he or she faces is actually not the blue, but the red. Because this is the belief that parents have. And the beliefs actually guide what the decision is going to be. Okay? So what happens in this case is, instead of choosing this point here, they're going to choose a point that has lower levels of investment, because they're thinking investment doesn't pay as much, and higher levels of consumption. Okay? That's story number one. How does this reference... Yes, go ahead.
Is this the same as if they had incorrect or uninformed beliefs about the actual returns to human capital?
This is
the production function.
This is the situation. The blue is the situation when they know the production function.
Yeah.
This is the situation when they have biased beliefs about the production function. Now let's say that they have beliefs that are on average true, but they have uncertainty about the beliefs, about the parameters. That's what you're asking?
So I was asking if they.
So could you rewrite this as they know the production function, but they have uncertainty about, or they have biased beliefs about the returns to human capital? So I guess is that going to be the same, or is that going to be?
No. So one is, this is unbiased and no uncertainty.
Yeah.
This is biased without uncertainty. There's another case which is unbiased with uncertainty. Unbiased with uncertainty in this world here would lead to less investment. But in a dynamic fashion it might not, because it depends what you assume about learning. Not going to talk about it, but you can actually have investments that are larger because of uncertainty, because the investment leads parents to learn about what the production function is going to be. And this is consistent with what we see in high-income families in which birth order effects are really large. Parents invest a lot in the first child, less in the second, a lot less in the third. I am the 17th in my family, so I almost got no investment at all. I was basically raised by the cats and dogs in my home. So here's what happens, right? Now let's talk about heterogeneity in reference points. The way to understand heterogeneity in reference point is almost as if each parent had two selves. One is the parent that really is concerned about child development, which is this parent here, which is this self of the parent. And the other one is the parent that is actually not at all concerned about child development, or not as much concerned about child development. And these two selves agree on this kink, and here's what their preferences are going to be. And this is, if they knew the production function, this is what this parent would choose. A parent that expects little in terms of child development when the child is about to finish. And then a parent that has high expectations would be worried a lot more, would invest more. And then you can put it all together and you can see how difficult it would be to untangle these stories, because I now have told you that I have all types of beliefs that we don't observe, and I can explain all of the data by making up any story that I want, right? I can just say it's all beliefs about the production function, it's all beliefs about preferences, and so on and so forth. A lot of my research nowadays, Theodore and Chris are here, are also working on this, is trying to separate what is beliefs about production function, beliefs about reference points, the impact of income, the impact of prices of investment. All of these are policy variables that we can actually operate on. Okay, so let me talk a lot of, so 3 papers that I don't think I'm going to cover all of them. The first paper is, can we elicit maternal subjective expectations? And I think the answer is yes. We've done this. Theodora, Chris have done this as well. Can we actually change beliefs? And I will tell you that under certain circumstances, yes, we can. And then do reference points affect parental investments in children? And I think that there is a story, there's a reason to believe that it does. I'll tell you a particular context in which it actually happened. So this is a study that I've been involved for 5 years. When the moms were pregnant with the first child, we measure subjective expectations during the second trimester of the first pregnancy. And in round 2, when the children were 9 to 12 months, we went back and measured maternal investments. In round 3, we measured child development when the kids were 22 to 26 months old. And then in round 4, it's a little bit late to do this kind of intervention here, but we did an RCT about language development when the children were about 28 to 32 months old. It's a very specific RCT. I'll tell you why in a second. So let's go back to the Complementarity formulation. This is the parameter that I am interested in. I can go and do anchoring, measurement error, endogeneity, recover these parameters, right? But then the question is, do parents believe that the numbers that I estimate are the numbers that they actually are acting on? Now, I can't go to a clinic and ask them, what do you think is psi 0? What do you think is psi 1? Although it would be great if we could, right? Tell me psi 0, psi 1, psi 2, psi 3. Thank you. Next. Tell me no, it doesn't work. I can tell you this. So here's what happens. They have an information set that a huge story that I can't tell you is where this information come from, this information set come from. Does it come from their sisters, their mothers, the people in the neighborhood where they live, or so on and so forth. But let's assume that they have some expectation given H0 and Xi and the history that they bring with themselves equal to this number. Now, for now, let's assume that this guy is actually equal to 0. This can be relaxed. We're not so worried about this guy here. We're more worried about this guy here. So from the point of view of the mother, the expectation of human capital, the amount of human capital she expects the child to have given H0 and X is actually equal to this expression here. Okay? Now this is different across moms. They don't have to share beliefs about this. Question?
Yeah, I mean, you were saying that there could be unbiased, there could also be variance.
Sure,
around,
you can. And you can.
Unbiased or biased beliefs, whatever, but that could also be a variance in the actual side.
Sure, no, that's what I mean. Uncertainty about, yes, it's uncertainty. So there are two things.
It could actually be different for different moms.
And here we're going to allow this to happen. So this is mu I, and I is mum I. So you can have heterogeneity in mu, but another story is moms would have not only a first moment about this guy, but also would have a second moment about this guy, both of which are possible to be elicited. Okay?
So you're assuming that there is one actual psi 0 for all the
Oh, psi, yes.
That
is. Oh, yes. Great problem that I don't know the solution to.
No, me either. No, I always say
Yeah. No, and I mean it because unless X is actually exogenous, you don't actually get point estimates for this. If you have, let's say, psi 2i, and investment is endogenous, and even if you have an RCT, what you get in this case is bounds. You don't actually get point estimates. So I don't think it's an object that can be estimated, point estimated, unless the manipulation is directly on X.
No, but even if it was, you would get an average treatment of that, right? And this would be the average across all kids, which
No.
the same problem.
No, let me rephrase this. You could estimate the distribution of psi. You wouldn't be able to estimate my psi versus your psi. Okay? And the reason why you would, happy to talk more about this, but I'm not going to talk more about this. But you can, but yes, I mean, I don't think that there is, the problem that you're pointing out to is super interesting, but I don't think there is a solution. I really don't. I mean, I wish there was. But I will tell you the following story. It's almost uninteresting if the situation is the difference between this term and this term is because they are reporting the true mu versus they underestimate the true psi. Okay? In other words, one story that you're saying is they are reporting their psi and they don't have a biased version of psi. Another one is they are reporting, they believe that there is one psi, but their belief about psi is actually a number below psi. From the point of view of policy, those questions make no difference for me because one question is, why are they using a technology that is so bad versus why is it that they believe that the technology is so bad? Okay, but in terms of policy, I would like to actually work on both, whether the story is one or versus the story is another one. Okay, so so this can lead to, here's what's going to happen. This can lead to, here's the entire problem. Okay, most of the time we don't actually observe, we don't actually have mu2 or mu3. What we do is we say parents have no developed psi, so they believe, so we say mu I2 is equal to psi 2 and mu I3 is equal to psi 3. Okay, and then we already know this term and we already know this term because we estimated the production function, and then we look at the relationship for between investment and other variables to estimate alpha 1 and alpha 2. Okay, that's what we do. The minute that I come and I say parents have beliefs, if I don't measure these beliefs, I can't estimate this data, because this model, because I don't know if the heterogeneity in investments that I see is because of heterogeneity in preferences or heterogeneity in beliefs. So I either have to measure heterogeneity in preferences and uncover and estimate what the heterogeneity in beliefs is going to be, or I have to measure the heterogeneity in beliefs and then uncover what the heterogeneity in preferences are going to be. And I can obviously do both at the same time. I can elicit preferences and I can elicit beliefs. That would be okay. So this is easy to do. Let me just tell you what we want to do. What we want to do is to estimate these guys. You agree with me? Agree with me? So here's step number one. You create scenarios for parents about these variables. Say, one scenario is both are low. Another scenario is both are high. Another scenario is this one is low, this one is high. Another scenario is this one is low and this one is high. Okay, so you have 4 scenarios, at least 4. Why 4? 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 4 parameters. So for every person, you need to have at least 4 moments. Remember G&M, method of moments? You have to have at least the same number of moments as the number of parameters. So that is the story, okay? Now that you told them the scenarios, you ask them questions about this guy. But you have to be careful, because if you're going to measure actual development using a scale, you want things to be comparable, so you want to use the same scale to measure what the expected level of human capital is going to be. Okay? So now that you have 1, you know the value, and therefore you know this value. You have 4 elements here, and you have 4 responses here, each one for 1 scenario. You just run an OLS regression parent by parent, and then for each parent, you're going to recover the mu's, right? And if you want to be really fancy, you can ask them to report not only expected values, but you can actually ask them to report variances, how uncertain they are. And then you can actually explore also variability, not only variability, their perceived variability, their perceived uncertainty about each one of these parameters. Okay, that's how the story is. And then that's it, done. However, and I'm gonna let you, I'm not gonna. It's 12:30, right? You're sure, right? Not like 1:30. It's 12:30, right? Okay, so this. I'm gonna skip a lot of things here because, but this is basically what this is doing. Step 1. Let me make sure that you understand. Step 1, create scenarios. 4 scenarios. Step 2, for each one of the scenarios, ask moms what they believe child development is going to be. Step 3, run an OLS regression. It's not exactly an OLS regression, but here in the notes I say exactly what you have to do, and then you're good to go. Then you get the mu's. Then you do something really nice with this. You wait for a year. Keep this in the fridge for a year. You skip a lot of, here, what you go. This is the data that you collected. These are the scenarios that you actually ask the mom to report. And then you can do MUI2 by looking at differences in scenarios divided by differences in the responses rescaled by the differences in scenarios that you used. Okay, now this is for 1 item. But remember when I was talking about measurement error? You don't want to do this only for 1 item because moms will have a hard time answering this question. Okay? So you want to do this for more than 1 item. And when you do for more than 1 item, something really nice actually happens. And you see this in the data. Here are 2 items that constitute the measurement of child development when children are 2 years old. This is whether the child speaks a partial sentence with 3 words or more or not. And this is whether the child knows own age and sex. This is actual data. Okay? This is actual data. As you can see, at any age, let's say age 16, a larger fraction of kids can speak a partial sentence than know own age and sex. This means that this item here is an easier item than this one here, because a higher fraction of kids at any age can actually do those items, right? So then you confront the mom You create the scenarios, and then you ask first, speak, under this scenario, how likely is it that the child will be able to speak a partial sentence with 3 words or more? So you're going to ask this question for the 4 scenarios. And then you come back to her and say, okay, now instead of speaking partial sentence, how likely is it that the child will be able to know own age and sex for each one of those scenarios? If moms understand the kind of questions that you're asking, what you should see in the data is that they would recognize that know own age and sex is more difficult than speak partial sentence, and they would attach for the same scenario of human capital investment a higher probability for speaking partial sentence than own age and sex. And that's exactly what we see in the data. So this is, for example, for a particular scenario of investment in human capital at birth, moms tend to say that the probability at age 24 months is higher for speak partial sentence than know own age and sex. Okay? That's number 1. So that asking several items from the instrument allows you to check if parents actually understand the questions you are answering. And after doing this in several locations, I realized that parents understand those questions, and not only do they understand those questions, they actually like to answer those questions. But the other thing that we know is that if parents understand the questions, the amount of measurement error would be very small. And if they're just randomly given numbers, they would give the same ages, they would give the same probabilities regardless of the difficulty of the items, which then would translate into a lot of measurement error. But what we see is more like this world, in which there is some measurement error, but there is predictive behavior, than this world here, in which they're just randomly guessing what the probability is going to be like. I mean, it's quite interesting. And what really surprised me is the lower the level of development in which we do this, the more parents seem to enjoy doing it, which to me was a little bit surprising, because the cognitive demand of doing this type of questionnaire is actually not small. So let me show you one thing though. What I can tell you is that, number 1, parental beliefs about new2 predict investments when kids are 1 year later. I'm not going to say anything about causal for now, but parents that report having higher beliefs about the impact of investment when they are pregnant, before the child was born, and that's the first child that they actually going to have, when we go back 1 year later, they're actually investing more in their kids. Okay? So now let me tell you something else, which is this R3T. So this is language environment. So this is a very short intervention that lasts only 13 weeks. We wanted to do this because of costs, not for us, but for the parents to be in programs that last 2 years. Okay? Many of the home visitation programs that they have in the United States require long-term participation of the parents. And as a result, the graduation rates in these programs are extremely low, very, very low. And which seems that there are a lot of wasted resources. So what we did is a program that lasts 13 weeks. And then in each week, there is an 1 hour session. 20 minutes of this session is to explain to the parent the importance of language environment to language development. We have videos that we shot with researchers in neuroscience that explain brain science and brain development in areas of brain related to language development, and how language environment affects the development of those parts of the brain. It's really quite nice. Some of these experiments that were done are actually quite painful to watch. You have these beautiful little kids, 3 months old, and parents are not reacting in any sense or form to every kind of language input that the child puts out there. And the parent remains passive. And in 2 minutes, the child starts to look a little bit desperate. In 5 minutes, the child is like looking at what happened with my world. And in 10 minutes, the child starts crying. Okay? So we showed this, and invariably moms started crying, so which led to a problem because we didn't want them to cry. But a lot of it, we realized, is information that they actually didn't know. Language environment actually promotes language development and parts of the brain linked to language development. Then we have another set of videos that we show and discuss with them about how to use everyday situations to improve the language environment of the children. We don't want these parents to actually completely change their lives, but we do want them to recognize that there are many situations in which they're not engaging with the child, that they could engage with the child. Okay? And what's really interesting is we started with a few tips, and then parents shot videos of how they were identifying opportunities to interact with children. So we now have like 400 videos shot on smartphones that parents said, we would never imagine, like waiting for a bus. And then they say, we're waiting for I mean, it's amazing. I mean, parents really love this. But I think that the third thing that is really different from everything is that we actually have objective feedback of the language environment. And here's what we did. This little device here, maybe about this big, goes into the child's clothing and records the environment. It records the environment of the child for 16 hours. Okay? We then, instead of having research assistants who must agree and listen to 16 hours of tape, we connect this to the computer and it processes a lot of data. We don't hear the conversations. We're not interested in listening to the conversations, but it does transcribe to us automatically. Adult word counts, conversation time counts, child vocalization counts, the number of minutes the child was exposed to TV, the volume of the TV, the volume of the parent talk, because if the parent is yelling, it's different from the parent saying, oh, you're so cute, right? So we do want to recognize this. So lots of data about measures. We needed to, yes, go ahead.
You can tell the difference between TV and
Yes, I can.
That's weird, I don't know.
Very different wave frequencies. That's how you actually identify what it is. It's a machine learning algorithm. Very cool, but happy to talk more. Yeah. So here's what's going on. So we selected families that we knew talked very little, and families that kids were really doing badly already at age 2 for this program. This is usually a type of family that is difficult to get to participate in home visitation programs because they are isolated, they don't engage with a lot of people. Let me just tell you 2 things. In terms of adult word counts, this particular parent here was in the 5th percentile. Yes?
Just a question, how did you find them then?
We were working with them for 2 years in a study. We enrolled them in a study and then we built a relationship with them. And a lot of the cost was maintaining that relationship, because these are families that are extremely mobile. They are being evicted every time. They change the address all the time. They are not socially connected with people. So we had to invest a lot of money to make sure that we kept in touch with them. And over the period, they actually established a good relationship with our researchers. One of the things that I worry about is how much of the impact here is because they really trusted us. You know what I'm saying? It's not some random person that one day showed in front of their house and say, we have this program for you. We actually have something. Yeah. You had a question? This is in Philadelphia. Okay. And then in terms of conversation terms, so one of the things that you want to do is you want to record for 2 days. The reason why you want to record for 2 days is that a language environment varies tremendously, right? So for example, I arrived yesterday. If you had put this in my device, well, I arrived from the US, I went to bed at 4 p.m. I woke up at 3 a.m. So my language environment yesterday was completely different from my language environment today. Okay? And this is true for me, this is true for everyone, all of us. So you want to get rid of some of this noise that you actually observe. Okay? And what's nice about this, and we observe a lot more things, I'm not showing all that we observe, but what's nice about this, we can actually construct hour by hour or minute by minute, 5 minute by 5 minute windows of language interaction. Okay? So the objective feedback is we tell them, this is, okay, so the first thing that we tell them is, my friend, this is where you are. In the 26th percentile, you need to improve. Okay? But we don't tell them, this sucked, this was really bad. No, this is not what we say. We say, oh, you talked a lot here and here to the child. And by the way, we always focus on conversation turns. Adult words, not as important for the child. The conversation turn is a direct measure of parent-child interaction. So our target is always this guy here. Okay? Then we tell them, what is it that you were doing this time that you think you could do a little bit more here over this time? Okay, so we ask them to write diaries. Okay, and we ask them, please identify those opportunities. Not so much now between 11 and 1, but more between 1 and 3. Okay? And let's see if we can raise this a little bit. So this is the same mom, was in the 26th percentile. This is the last session that she participated. So we were able to bring her from 25th percentile after 13 sessions to about 75th percentile in terms of conversation turn counts. Yes, go ahead.
So are these mothers home with the child all day? Or?
No.
No, okay.
These are single moms. These are single moms. And you know what was there were many things I didn't expect to find. One of the things that I expected to find is when they actually asked us to provide them with an extra recorder, so they could take the recorder to the child care center and see how much language environment, the quality of the language environment their children had at the child care center, which was a problem as we had to explain to them. We didn't actually have authorization to record a child care center. But the minute that we started realizing that they were demanding this information is when I realized we changed something about their perception of the language environment, the importance of a language environment to language development. Okay? So here's adult word counts. So this is, I can do, unfortunately, we have to do, not all parents were able to do recordings that were valid. So I'm going to, this is a small sample size, and the reason why it's a small sample size is because I already started with parents that were doing really badly. We really wanted to target parents that were talking very little. They were really in the bottom of the distribution of parents that don't talk a lot to begin with. Okay. But this is why. Very low skill here. Most of them are actually high school dropouts. They have their own difficulty with language as well. Okay, so reading level here you should think is grade 5. They have the equivalent of a 5th grade student in terms of reading. What we were able to do is to increase conversation turns. This almost doubles conversation turns. Typical conversation turns in this population is about 270 per day. The control group starts with 270, finishes with 270. The control group, the treatment group goes to almost 500. Almost 500. Child vocalization is also increased. Then there is an automatic vocalization assessment. This looks at the complexity of the vocalization of children that vocalize longer, or children that vocalize with richer kinds of elements. Then you get higher scores. This score is highly correlated with professional assessment done by language pathologists. Okay, so people that actually look at language development validated this automatic vocalization assessment. And this is a standardized score, which means that we increased by almost 50% of the standard deviation. So and this is controlling for a lot of different things. But what's really interesting is not the reason why there's a difference between random assignment and a dummy for attendance. This is everyone who showed up at least one time for this assessment. Now, the vast majority, if they showed up once, they actually graduated. The graduation rate is 92%, so it's very high. But showing up once is not 92%. only 60% of the moms showed up at least once. Okay, so this is the difference between ITT, intent to treat, and local average treatment effect. This is what's going on in here. Okay, so maternal beliefs, those questions that I told you, the moms that there is no difference when you look at the ITT, but there is a difference when you actually look at the ones that actually had. This is a mistake. It shouldn't be here. At the ones that actually started at least once. Yeah, we standardized it. This is a 63% impact on maternal beliefs about the importance of language environment for language development of kids. And then you can look at the ones that actually moved the beliefs the most were also the ones that moved conversation terms the most. Okay, so this is telling you that A, we can measure beliefs, B, beliefs do predict investment 1 year later, and C, if we actually have a well-defined intervention that provides them with objective information, but also objective feedback about how well that they are doing, we can not only improve how much they are doing in terms of investments, but we can also improve change their beliefs as well. Okay? I am going to not have a lot of time, so I'm not going to talk about this paper. If people are interested about this. So let me conclude. What do I want to say? Nothing. Okay. So okay. So let me say, lots of work for you. Let me stop there. I think that the low-hanging fruit nowadays is that we don't actually know a lot about family formation processes and child developmental processes. I think that this is something that we really need to start working more. Assortative making, as described here, is a story that we need to pursue more seriously. Now that we have better data on measuring child development and investments in children, but I also think that we need to go about studying policies that foment or foster investments in kids in situations in which there is no well-defined family. It's not, it's not a well-defined father and mother anymore. Now it's one man that has children with 3 women and 1 woman that has children with 2 men. Okay, so this is the world in which we are right now, and this leads to a lot of different coordination problems. And we know from game theory that coordination games usually have multiple equilibria, and usually most of the equilibria that arise are actually not optimal, are not parental optimal, which leaves a lot of possibilities for policy that can improve the equilibria that arises from these types of models. Okay. The other thing that I think we are really lagging behind is in terms of all the work that I've done, and I hate doing it. I really hate, but I think it's difficult to actually do better unless we collect better data. I think that we have good theory, but I don't think we have. But even theory, I don't think is as developed as could be. Which is, in my world, a child is just a robot, right? I mean, just gets things. You do this, you do that, right? The child is never a player. Child never makes a decision. And I think that that's a major limitation of a lot of the work I've done. And it's especially problematic when we think about adolescents, because certainly adolescents are not going to behave as robots, right? I think that there are problems with data. There is a fundamental problem on how to measure investments. Part of the issue why I've been focusing on language so much in my recent work is because I think that we have better measures of language environment than for other things. But we need to have the same discipline for the development of data, for better metrics of investments in children than what we've done so far, precisely because we want to expand on theory. Another one is, I think there is huge amount of work to bridge between child development, psychology, and economics to implement and evaluate new programs that can foster human capital formation. And I think that we always have to keep in mind that we are social scientists, whether we are economists or not. And I think that even if we do have randomized controlled trials that can implement and evaluate new programs, I think it's important to keep in mind that we want to identify mechanisms, because the mechanisms will tell you, here are theories that are consistent with the mechanisms, here are theories that are not consistent with the mechanism. And I think that we don't actually do as much as we should. We need to be eliminating certain theories, and we need to be, because they are really, if we actually can focus on a few theories that are consistent with the facts, that will lead us to better formulation of public policies for the formation of human capital. I think that I have more. Oh no. Oh, where is the other list? Ah, sorry, I missed it. But I have more ideas of things that we can do. But I think that this is a great year to be graduating from your PhD, because technology in measurement and in econometrics, I think will allow us to have better measures of human capital and better measures of investments in human capital. If we have better measures of both, that means that we can actually make a lot of progress in understanding why certain policies work and certain policies do not work. And this will lead us to design better policies for the future generations. And I think that you're graduating right here. I mean, I just wish I had picked my year of birth as well as you had. Clearly you did a better job at picking your date of birth than I did, so I congratulate you on that. I'm going to stop here. Okay?